Casual Friday. That means Monday is Casual Monday. Tuesday, Casual Tuesday. Wednesday, Casual Hump Day. Thursday, Casual Thurs. That's what we call it. And Friday, Casual Shabbat. The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
It is Friday, October 18th, 2019. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. It's Casual Friday, folks. Things are not casual around here. Crazy week of news. On the program today, we're going to start with a interview with Eric Blanc, who's going to give us an update on what's happening with the Chicago teachers' strike. And with us all day will be Nomiki Konst. In the meantime, Mick Mulvaney admits quid pro quo. Wait a second, did I say that out loud? Meanwhile, after a rigorous search, Trump administration awards his hotel the G7 hosting rights. Meanwhile, Erdogan manhandles Trump and Kurds will pay. Speaking of pay, a $50 billion settlement of the opioid case may be in the offing. The New York City Council votes to close Rikers, but then build 4 new jails. Meanwhile, Rick Perry to resign. And congratulations, September 2019 was the hottest ever in North America. The Republicans' most vulnerable senators are losing ground. A very disturbing CDC report. Suicide rates of 10 to 14-year-old children have increased 3 times in the past 10 years. All this and more on today's program. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got a lot to get to today. So much news. I have really not been able to sleep for the past week because of just the constant barrage of news. But joining me today, Michael is ill. Joining, sadly, but fortunately, Nomi was coming into studio anyways.
Yeah.
So
more talking time. Yes. Thanks, Michael.
Exactly. Before we get into stuff and before we get to Eric Blanc, a little bit of house cleaning. We have some great news, ladies and gentlemen. Right now, if you go to your app store, whether you are iOS or Android, or you can just go to majorityapp.com for the links, you will find a new updated Majority Report app. On that app, not only will you have the ability to search our entire set of shows, you also have the ability to download shows. I'm getting in the subway. I can't stream it. Okay, download it. And then you look in the menu, it's in your downloads folder, and then you can also get rid of it. There's also, obviously, all the links to support the show and But also on that show, ladies, on the app I'm holding here in my hand, you go to AMQ. So not only can you get the Majority Report live. Right now, we're live. As you can see, live now shows up on the app, gives you the opportunity to call, or you can go look at the YouTube show, or you can play the show. That's going to be weird. Now shows up on the app. Gives you there it is. There you go.
Creepy.
Yeah, it's creepy. And or you can just call into the show, and you can message at the bottom the show down there. And then if you go to the podcast, obviously has all the podcasts. As you can see, I'm a member of the show, so I get the member version. And then, what's this AMQ? What the heck is that? You can go look at the YouTube show. Oh, wait, that's the Majority Report Live. Wait a second. Sorry.
So easy.
Oh, here we go.
It is Friday, October 18th. I'm I'm Sam Seder.
Yeah, that's the AM Quickie is available right there on the app. So you can either subscribe, of course, the AM Quickie in other places, but so there it is, all in one place. We're going to add the link to the Instagram account as well on that app. But we don't have it up yet. Just occurs to me we need to do that. You got to check out the Instagram. We have a huge supercomputer that uses artificial intelligence and puts up all the best content that you could possibly want on the Instagram feed. We have one, Joe Biden taking a selfie and not quite figuring out how you're supposed to hold the phone. But that's all right.
Is that with the teeth in or without the teeth?
Yeah, no, I think the teeth were in on that one. All right, so let's just start here. Any one of the top four stories I have here, we could spend an entire show on, but we don't have the ability to do that. Yesterday, the Trump administration announced that they had struck the deal of a lifetime with Turkey. This is after releasing the letter that looked like it was written by an 8-year-old. And supposedly showing how tough Donald Trump was. Here he is making the announcement about the supposed ceasefire. Within moments after this, Turkey made it clear this is not a ceasefire. It's just a pause. And it's basically what this amounts to is basically saying, like, look, you got 5 days to go. We're going to either ethnically cleanse this area the easy way or we're going to do it the hard way. And that's basically what Turkey is saying. And Donald Trump is announcing this as if it is some type of huge feat of diplomacy. He waved essentially Turkey in. Turkey is a NATO affiliate. I mean, a signed member of NATO. And the idea that the United States wouldn't have the ability to say to Turkey, no, you're not doing this, and didn't have the leverage is, of course, absurd. But here's Donald Trump trying to spin this in some way, and nobody seems to be buying it. I mean, I imagine the people who don't care about it at all buy it, some of his supporters, but nobody seems to be buying this.
But this is an incredible outcome. This outcome is something they've been trying to get for 10 years, everybody, and they couldn't get it. Other administrations, and they never would have been able to get it unless you went somewhat unconventional. I guess I'm an unconventional person. I took a lot of heat from a lot of people, even some of the people in my own party, but they were there. In the end, they were there. They're all there. Look, this is about the nation. This isn't about Republicans or Democrats. This is about our nation. So we have a 5-day ceasefire. During that 5 days, the Kurds and other people they're going to be taken great care of. They're going to be moving around, moving out of a safe zone, which is something that Turkey has always wanted. The ISIS, they call them Daesh, but we call them ISIS. The ISIS fighters that we have captured, they'll be under very, very strict control of various different groups, but we will be watching. We will be in charge.
He also went on, and part of the clip also where he basically says the Turks need to go in there and cleanse it. I mean, he literally says the word cleanse. And I thought that was the clip that we had there, but I think it was just a different part of what Trump is saying there. But it's stunning.
So he knows enough to use the word cleanse. This is why when people say, "Oh, he's an idiot," he doesn't know. He knows. He has enough information there to use it the wrong way, to be dangerous with it. And I mean,
so somebody could have, like, literally, it could have been one of the senators who have a problem with this come in and say, you realize you're basically, the Turks are going in there to ethnically cleanse this area, and he probably it just stuck in his head,
right?
And then regurgitates it. But this is, I mean, we're on the brink of a massive disaster. Now, the Kurds have been sold out by this country. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know when the first time was, but I know it goes back at least until like the Kissinger era, where the Kurds were used, where the Iranians used the Kurds, I think, on Iraq. And then when Saddam basically towed the line, we then sold out the Kurds to to Saddam. And then George Herbert Walker Bush said, rise up in the north of Iraq and we'll be there for you. And we weren't. It's a horror show. I mean, I don't know what the solution is in terms of but this is, we're on the brink, I think, of another humanitarian catastrophe. And I don't know. I mean, look, the Syrian civil war was one that we couldn't, I think, in my estimation, do anything to improve the situation. But this is one which I think we caused. Do we have that clip of him saying cleanse? Yeah. All right, here it is.
A 22-mile strip that for many, many years, Turkey, in all fairness, they've had a legitimate problem with it. They had terrorists. They had a lot of people in there that they couldn't have. They've suffered a lot of loss of lives also, and they had to have it cleaned out. But once you start that, it gets to be to a point where a tremendous amount of bad things can happen. So a process started, and we started to negotiate. And I think that obviously the sanctions and tariffs were going to be very biting. I'm glad we don't have to do it. We'll be taking them off very quickly as soon as this is finalized. But this is an incredible outcome.
So in other words, you can go in there, give us 5 days, get as many of those people out, then go ahead. We're going to lift the sanctions. There's a lot of people who are, I mean, there's two different theories here, right? One is that there's some type of payoff situation, which wouldn't be that terribly strange, knowing Donald Trump's modus operandi. The other is he just got rolled by Erdogan and was literally just too intimidated to do anything.
Do you think that, or
I don't know which one I believe, but it had to have been one of those two things. I mean, either there is some type of leverage being exercised on Trump, right? By, someone's giving him this idea to do it.
Someone is definitely doing it. Is it Erdogan, or is it who benefits from global destabilization and NATO?
Well,
I think we...
Right. I mean, look, Russia's not upset about this. Let's put it that way. Obviously. But it could just be that Erdogan just sort of muscled him in. It could be that he has a hotel there. But the idea that there is some type of policy prescription here that he has thought out or that his people have thought out, or the idea that he thinks his people who vote for him are really that heavily invested in those, several hundred U.S. military personnel who are going to leave Syria. I mean,
you never want to minimize any sort of military presence, but it's pretty small.
And they were basically on a peacekeeping mission.
Exactly.
I mean, so of all the places you could pull our military out of, I mean, it was a combat theater, but they were not actively engaged in combat. I mean, it's hard to come up with an answer that people would get.
Yeah. It is fun to hear him talk about it like he's a goddamn game show host, though.
We made a deal.
You've been great,
Real
Kurds.
fun.
Yep.
You will not be advancing to the next round. Bye-bye.
It's unbelievable.
Oh my God, I don't want to laugh at that. It's
folks,
very funny, but not.
Hey, today's show is sponsored by Babbel. Babbel is going to get you speaking a new language quickly and with confidence. You can choose from 14 different languages. You want to hear the...
What a segue.
Here it is. Yeah, well, you can learn Turkish. They can teach you Turkish at Babbel. German, Spanish, French, Italian, Portuguese, Swedish, Dutch, Turkish, Polish, Indonesian, Russian, Danish, Norwegian, and English.
No Greek?
Sorry.
Turkish and not Greek? What is this? No wonder I can't learn Greek still after 35 years.
Well... But now you have the opportunity to learn 14 other languages, Nomi.
Done. Easy.
And the thing about Babbel is that their lessons are created by over 100 language experts, real people, not by translation machines, not by artificial intelligence. The lessons are engaging and convenient. They last only 10 to 15 minutes, and you can learn through interactive dialogues so you perfect your pronunciation and accent. Babbel is available as an app or online. Your progress syncs across all devices. If you want in on the competition that we're going to launch very shortly with Babbel amongst everybody in the office who can speak their language quick,
Tell me about this.
Michael is going to learn Portuguese, supposedly.
It's Brazilian Portuguese.
Oh my God.
I'm going for Spanish myself.
Okay.
I think Jamie's going Spanish. And
So
I would
it has
imagine...
to be,
I have a bit of a head start, but in order for me to actually do this, it should probably be Spanish.
Yeah. And
'Cause I would like to improve my Spanish.
Matt,
Oh, they're
I would say
French.
German. Oh, French.
Yeah.
Oh, all right.
wait, so is the competition like how much progress you make? Because if you have a base
How
in
good you
Spanish,
speak. Yeah, I know.
That's
That's gonna
really-
be, we got to figure out some
It's gonna be very qualitative.
I'll
yeah.
jump in on this.
Well, and as you listen to this show, Babbel has a special offer for you. Go to Babbel.com and select the language of your choice. Once you try it for free and are ready to sign up, select the 3-month option, and Babbel will give you another 3 months free with the promo code Majority. That's 6 months for the cost of 3 with promo code Majority. Go to Babbel, Babbel.com, enter promo code Majority. Babbel, speak a new language with confidence. And this is one of my favorite our advertisers. I use these guys quite a bit, actually. We've talked about Grove.co. It's Grove.co, not com. Co. It's got healthy, plant-based, non-toxic cleaning products. Ones that work. The good ones are actually enjoyable to use. And sometimes it's hard to know which products to trust. That's where Grove Collaborative comes in. Grove Collaborative is the online marketplace that delivers all natural home, beauty, and personal care products directly to you. Very convenient. They offer reoccurring shipments too, so you're always stocked with your favorite brands. Like, for me, 7th Generation.
Yeah.
I mean, they have others, but 7th Generation is the one because I'm very sensitive to smell. And so I get the 7th Generation soap, hand soap. As you can see, we have it in all of our hand washing places here. You can join over 500,000 families who trust the Grove Collaborative to make their homes happier and healthier. Plus, shipping is fast and free on your first order. So the
This is
7th
such a good
Generation...
deal. I have to say, my mom just did this. My mom renovated her life and got rid of like every chemical in her house. And I walked in and I was like, you must have spent a fortune and doing this myself, Whole Foods, whatever. It's a really good deal.
Yeah, this is this stuff is it's convenient, and then there's new stuff that you find on there that I use. But for me, 7th Generation, I got it for my dish soap, I got it for my hand soap. They've got the spray cleaners, and they have these their own little concoctions that they make. I don't know how to do it, but it's
What is that? A sponge?
no, it's a spray bottle, and then they have a concentrate, and you put the water in, and you have a spray bottle, and it's kids around. If you got pets, it makes you feel a little bit safer not to have all those chemicals. And for a limited time, when my listeners go to grove.co/majority, you will get a free 5-piece fall gift set from Mrs. Myers and Grove, free shipping, and a free 60-day VIP trial. For a limited time only, you can choose from the best-selling fall scents like apple cider, acorn spice, mum, and pumpkin spice. Simply go to grove.co/majority. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Eric Blanc will discuss the Chicago teacher strike with Nomi and myself. We'll be right back after this. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report on the phone. It's a pleasure to welcome back to the program the author of Red State Revolt, a book on the teachers' strikes that took place last year. I think it was now. I can't, time is completely dilated for me. He's also a former high school teacher and a writer for Jacobin. Eric Blanc, welcome back to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me on again.
So, Eric, you're in Chicago. Just give us the broad strokes of what's happening with this strike. And people should know, for context, this is the second strike that the Chicago Teachers Union has gone on since, I think the first one was in 2011, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, so the first strike really that broke the labor movement's refusal to withhold its labor for a long time and really started turning the tide on corporate education reform was the Chicago teachers strike of 2012, actually. So only 7 years ago. And in that time, we've really seen a sea change, most recently with the spread of the teachers strikes. But what you see now in Chicago is not only the teachers striking this time, but it's also the school staff personnel in Local 73, which is a SEIU affiliate. So you have teachers together with school workers on strike. Today is day 2 of their strike. And really, this is in some ways an offensive strike, which is to say that it's to roll back all of the budget cuts and understaffing and real deterioration of conditions that have been imposed upon both students and teachers over the last decades in Chicago. So the demands for the teachers are primarily around things like lower class sizes, demanding a nurse in every school, a counselor, real quality of education type demands. And then for the school workers, for them, a lot of them are making poverty wages. They're working 2-3 jobs. And for them, it really is not just about better conditions, but they need better pays just so they can survive and stay in Chicago.
One of the things that I think that really sort of came out of the 2012 strike was I guess a widening sense or understanding of the concept of social justice unionism as opposed to the managerial unionism. And there's been a lot of since that time, I imagine it was, and maybe that's just when I became more conscious of it, but we've seen that spread, particularly in the context of teachers unions in particular, and not even unions in some of those states that you wrote about in Red State Revolt. But just give us a sense of what that means in the context of a teacher's strike.
Right. The slogan that Chicago coined in 2012, and which is again the slogan and which has spread really across the country now, is we're fighting for the schools that our students deserve. And so the framing and the demands of the strike aren't limited to just getting better pay for teachers, and they're not limited just to getting better conditions for teachers. The idea is that in order to win against such powerful enemies, because we're talking not just about the Democratic establishment, but the big business interests that stand behind them and that are profiting off of privatization and that don't want to see their taxes go up in order to pay for good schools. So if you're going up against such powerful opponents, you need to roll deep. You need to bring in the community, you need to bring in parents, you need to bring in students. And that's really what Chicago in 2012 and since, and again now with this strike, has shown, is that if you can make this about the working class as a whole, because really that's what we're talking about, the whole city, you can't walk around Chicago right now without seeing almost on, every couple of blocks you'll see educators picketing together with students and parents. If you bring in all of working people in the city, then you're a lot stronger. And so really this is a type of model of unionism that used to exist. It's not really new. It's what the labor movement was founded on in the 1930s and earlier. The labor movement fought not only for its members, but for working people generally. That's one of the reasons why it had so much support. But for reasons having to do with the institutionalization of the labor movement, that kind of broader working class struggle got lost. And so what's so exciting about the strikes in Chicago and then, West Virginia, Los Angeles in recent period is that it's bringing back that fight for social justice, what's called bargaining for the common good. And, it works. And that's why it's spreading.
Do you have a sense of how the teachers? I mean, because in the context of this type of strike, but also this kind of unionism, like the work is done right before the strike. I mean, these relationships are forged before the strike. The solidarity is created over time through. And I guess my question is, like, through what? Like, what do you have a sense of what from talking to the union folks there, what they learned in 2012 and how they the lessons they took and what they went and started doing in terms of like broadening and deepening their reach and their relationships around the city, so to have that wider sense of support? I mean, the first thing that comes to mind, obviously, is that they're striking this time with all the other school employees. What else is indicative, or what else have you learned that they've done during that time that has sort of like pursued that goal more?
Right. So as you alluded to, teachers, not unlike some other professions like nursing or other workers, have, because of the nature of their job, organic links with broader sectors of the population. So that does give a lot of potential leverage for making connections in a way that isn't always the case for all workers. But there's nothing inevitable about that. For decades, teacher unions just fought, for the most part, for better pay, if they fought at all. And so what you've seen in CTU in 2012, and again, just to talk about right now, part of the way they won over parents is through the demands. And so because what they're fighting for are things like a nurse in every school, more counselors, smaller class sizes, it's very easy to make the case that, in fact, teachers aren't walking out on their students, but they're walking out for them. And for parents who, understandably, this is not an easy thing to deal with. If having school shut down creates a crisis for working class folks in any city, because where do you send your kids? What do you do? It's a sacrifice. But if you are fighting on behalf of their students, clearly, not just in rhetoric, but in the demands that you're insisting on winning from the city, then it becomes clear what the stakes are and why the broader community should support. And then even then, it's not inevitable. You can raise the demands, but you have to do a lot of work. You have to do a lot of outreach, meetings with parents, a lot of one-on-one discussions at the school sites. That's the sort of behind-the-scenes organizing that gets lost in the really brief accounts of the strike. It makes it seem like they just pop off, but in fact, it takes a lot of work, just like any organizing drive.
What are they doing in terms of? I think I saw online Bread for Ed, and what are they doing in terms of like? There's a lot of public school kids who get their lunch at school. And that because they qualify for free lunch, or, hopefully, and I'm not sure what the story is in Chicago. I know they do this in New York now, free lunch for everybody so that there's no stigma associated with it. What is the union doing in terms of like material help for parents and for students during the course of the strike that when they're dealing with issues that are a function of the strike?
Yeah. So, one of the things that the union has done is made the picket lines very inviting and supportive for both students and parents. And part of that is having a lot of food and a lot of singing and a lot of activities so that people will spend all day. And it's not very warm out right now, so spend all day, in the 40 degrees is not an easy ask. But, when you have that kind of proactive approach to getting folks out to the picket lines, it's easier. The Bread for Ed initiative actually came from the Chicago branch of the Democratic Socialists of America, which had done a similar initiative in Los Angeles with tacos for teachers, in the Oakland strike, with also called Bread for Ed. And so now there's a pretty strong tradition of Democratic Socialists taking the lead locally to raise funds. We're talking tens of thousands of dollars. In past strikes, there's even hundreds of thousands of dollars to raise money for food for students who need it. And, it's that type of solidarity that's really important, because if we can make the case to working people, and I think they have shown that in Chicago, that this is their struggle. If the educators win, we all win. That requires a lot of effort, and it requires providing food. It requires providing all the types of support needed so that students have some sort of option when the strike is happening.
Well, what's your sense of? I mean, does anybody there have a sense of how long the strike is going to go on? I mean, is it how much are people hunkering down, I guess?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think there's not any sense that this is going to end very soon. You never know, but the mayor is really, to the surprise of many people, playing hardball. And the reason I say that is that Mayor Lightfoot ran on a progressive education platform. It was almost like she copy and pasted the teacher union's demands. That's what she ran on. And so the fact that there's a strike at all, and then now that the mayor is pleading poverty, despite having run on this platform, and the fact that there's actually over $1 billion more in yearly funds for Chicago schools. So the money's there, even though she's trying to claim it's not. So given that, we could see this drag on for a little while. My sense is that the mayor is going to get a lot more pressure to cede to the demands of teachers. And for the most part, the polls show, and just walking around the city shows, that the public is backing educators. So really the pressure is increasing and will continue to increase on the mayor to settle.
Lastly, at least from a reportorial perspective, is there anything going on there that you think we should know that we haven't talked about at this point? I got one more question after that, but that's a little bit less about what's going on specifically in Chicago.
Well, I mean, I think one of the aspects that I touched on, but it's just worth underlining, is how important it is that this is a strike, not just of the teachers union, CTU, but also of Local 73, of the, which represents the special education classroom assistants, the custodians, bus drivers, things like that. And the reason that's so important is that, unlike a lot of strikes, including some of the recent ones, this is a strike of all school workers, and it gives it a level of power to shut down the schools that is really important. And it's also, there's a racial justice aspect to this, because overwhelmingly the support staff are Black and brown, overwhelmingly female. And so the strike this time is about racial justice, not just in the sense that it's supporting Black and brown students, but because there's Black and brown workers who are taking the lead by taking this risk. And a lot of them, are making poverty wages, as I mentioned before. And for them, going without pay over, even just a couple of days is not an easy ask. So I think that, it's just worth highlighting that aspect of the story, because it's not just a teacher's strike.
Okay, so lastly, you literally wrote the book on the teacher strikes that took place over the past year or so in rather unlikely places, at least in terms of organizing, or I should say, institutionalized unions. And to a certain extent, there was a sense, I think, with those strikes that Chicago had set the template, on some level, and it wasn't necessarily the inspiration, at least not directly, right? Because there's a 5 or 6 year lag in between there. But do you think that this second Chicago strike will have a similar and or greater impact on other teachers' unions or just teachers around the country? Because it does feel like this is a more offensive strike, as you said, to open it up, as opposed to back in 2012. I think they were reacting to Rahm Emanuel wanting to shut down 50 schools and abandoning, all but abandoning some of the operating schools. Give me your sense of whether you think this will impact other teachers around the country.
Definitely. Well, the first thing to say is that the 2012 strike did have a real demonstrable impact on the more recent strike upsurge. Not necessarily for the teachers as a whole, but for the small groups of activists that actually initiated these strikes, many of whom were democratic socialists. They started their organizing by studying the Chicago strike in Arizona, West Virginia, very consciously trying to organize on a similar model. And then today, looking at the impact, I think you're right. This is going to make a big, real change as far as the dynamics of the movement, because similarly to the Los Angeles strike and earlier this year, we're at this very interesting moment in public education policy in which the Democrats have been forced from below to change their tune around corporate education reform, privatization, austerity. And so you have the space now, if the strikes continue, to not only beat back attacks, but to really start talking about winning schools that we need. And that's not inevitable. It's going to take a lot of struggle. But I think, the moment is really ripe, partly because we also have the 2020 elections coming up. You have Bernie Sanders calling for a moratorium on charter schools, massive refunding of schools. And so now everybody who's running is talking left. So the combination of these strikes continuing, the Democratic Party saying that they support education, which is a good thing we need to lean on, and then the presidential elections means that there's a moment now that if it's seized can really start transforming the schools in a way that we haven't seen for decades.
And I should also add one more element of that. Not only has there been, it seems like a change, a retreat from the corporate reform movement within the Democratic Party. Part of that is not is also a function of, frankly, the Gates Foundation's experiment, the $750 million some odd dollars that they pumped into education to experiment with all of the things that we know as corporate education reform. They came out with a report. I guess I can't remember if it was the end of 2017, by maybe end of 18. Didn't work. The Rand Foundation comes out with Rand study comes out with a report. It didn't work. We should probably listen to educators. And so there does feel like not only like that. There's no rudder right now in the world of education. It seems to me, at least in terms of like the corporate forces and as reflected in the Democratic Party, there's room, like you say, there's oxygen there, and I think there's just not the same countervailing forces at this point.
Yeah, and I would take it a step further, which is to say, if you can transform public education now, get a massive refunding of the schools and really show what a robust, quality public sector could look like in education, well, think about the implications of that across the board, because that's what we're talking about when we're talking about a Green New Deal, when we're talking about Medicare for all. It's the case that actually a well-funded public sector is better for all working people and the vast majority of people in this country if you give it the funds it needs. And so the stakes really around education, which is one of the few remnants of the welfare state in this country, are really explosive, because if you can show that education is better when it's run by the people and public sector, really, why shouldn't that hold for other industries and for other sectors of the economy? And so I think that's what we're talking about, and it's why the moment we're in is so exciting.
All right, Eric Blanc, people can follow you on Twitter at _Eric Blanc. Couldn't get that first one without the underscore, huh, buddy?
Yeah.
Sorry.
I don't know who these other Eric Blancs are. I'm going to track them down someday.
But folks can follow you on Twitter and, of course, pick up Red State Revolt to learn more. Thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
So there you have it. We broke format today to have a guest.
It's important.
The thing is, there's so many stories going on right now that in any other era, this would be a story I would spend the whole day on.
Well, I'm also thinking, flashback to, 2004, and we were having education presidential debates with Republicans talking about, their version of education reform. Right. But how missing, we didn't have one education question in the Democratic debates. And that is an area, they might be frozen right now, the Cory Bookers of the world and the Pete Buttigieg and even Joe Biden's. I mean, these are ed reform, they've been backed by charter schools throughout their entire careers, and I think if you look back to the last 10 years of the Democratic Party, that has been the marker for who is a neoliberal and who is not. Even Hillary Clinton was not a charter school person. I always gave that to her. She was, tough on a lot of other issues, but when it came to education, she stood by the teachers, maybe not as progressive as we would have liked, but at least she wasn't a charter school. She was more progressive on that than the Obama administration.
Well, I mean, that's funny because I remember interviewing some of the top teacher union folk at the DNC,
right,
and about at the Democratic National Convention about how early they endorsed Clinton, and there was some sense of like, maybe had we known that Sanders, but people wanted to get in there first.
Right.
And I think like I think the sense was, and I spoke to Randy Weingarten, subsequent to that, and the way that she explained it to me was like they felt that they got burned in 2008 by not getting to the table first, getting in there early, and it allowed other forces to get in. I mean, it's sort of interesting, that dynamic that exists there, the calculation that's made. You want to get in early in an endorsement if you feel like you need to have more influence. And I don't know I mean, you would have obviously a much better sense of this. I think on some level, just, having, with your direct involvement in politics, but I don't know that makes sense to people.
I don't know if it's working anymore. I mean, that's the top-down union management that still is a force of nature in unions, but it's also become, one of the biggest problems. The teachers union is very progressive. Obviously, the membership in 2016 supported Bernie, and there was a little bit of an uprising, a response to Randy Weingarten, who is the president of the American Federation of Teachers. But when you look at a state like New York, this is actually a perfect example. Governor Cuomo takes tons of charter school money, and the IDC that held up the government took tons of charter school money. But the unions, not just the teachers unions, and it's a little complicated in New York because we have two, but not just the teachers unions, but other unions feel like they have to support the governor at the end of the day because he controls the budget.
Yep.
And that's the power.
It's a smart calculation, right? Because they know that these unions knew that if by some miracle Cynthia Nixon won the election, she wasn't going to punish them. She was still going to be a pro-union governor. But if Cuomo got in, which he was probably going to, and they didn't endorse him, he's a vindictive asshole. And it's the same thing with leaders of a lot of unions.
Yeah. That's exactly right. And I think there has been a change. At the very least, it's not a radical change in the context of particularly the Weingarten's union, that the membership has exerted its power more, and they've done so by withholding their labor across the country in many respects. And there was I went to that teachers union, I guess it was maybe last year in Pittsburgh, the conference, and there was a sense of like, hey, we sort of forgot. I mean, this is more the local folks. Yes. We sort of forgot that we had these arrows in our quiver, and there's a feeling like we're much more likely to go grab one. Right. And I think that sentiment has the implications of that sentiment is that the leadership of the union is aware that, like, I've got a more militant union now. Mm-hmm. And that militancy is not necessarily just fired at the management of the schools.
Right.
It's, they're gonna take more control and demand more say within the context of the union. So this is, that has big implications, I think, for the union movement going forward. And I think we're gonna, I think, and particularly if Donald Trump loses, regardless of who is the Democratic president, I think we're going to see unions become even more aggressive going forward.
Oh, yeah.
And let's just be real. The tipping point was Betsy DeVos. Cory Booker had to suddenly flip his script on unions because he'd been palling around with Betsy effing DeVos.
I mean, Eric Blanc mentioned the DSA in all of this, and this goes back to the rank and file strategy, which got a little bit of attention after it passed at the National Convention this year, wherein DSA members, young socialists, are encouraged and helped to get jobs in strategic sectors so that we can get more involved in our unions and create something more radical, grassroots, and rank and file. Right. And it's kind of a win-win because a lot of young people in DSA need good jobs anyway. So it makes a whole lot of sense.
Yep. All right, let's turn back just to Turkey for one more moment, because I know that, I mean, you were in the area, right?
Yeah, I was there in August, and I was like, well, where could I go? I had to get out of the EU there's just for you guys to know, in case you're curious, you can only stay in the EU for 90 days, but there are parts of the EU that have unilateral agreements, and you can leave the EU area and then go back to that country, and it's a reset. But it's only like Greece, France, a couple of other states. So I went to Turkey as a Greek, which is controversial. And, every travel advisory says don't go if you're an American. Some of it's a little overblown and retaliatory against Turkey. Same thing from the EU. But I wanted to see, it was like, well, can I go? How far in can I go before, it gets very dangerous? And sure enough, you can, as an American, go right to the border. It's extremely dangerous, obviously. But I was a little surprised that, given, because I wanted to go to a refugee camp. I should back it up, like why I actually wanted to go. And you can go, you can't get into the refugee camps unless if you're press, but you can go to volunteer. But it's extraordinarily dangerous. And it just really blew me away by the lack of restrictions. Turkey to me is a really confusing place for a million reasons. It's extremely developed. There was so much hope. If you look back to the Obama administration, Biden and Obama were praising their relationship with Erdogan early on, trying to build a strong friendship. Erdogan was notably a friend of Obama's. And when you go to a place like Istanbul, if you haven't been there, it's a beautifully democratic city as a facade. There's people are freely expressing themselves to a limit until they're arrested. So there's, I want to be cautious because I did talk to people. I was there, Turkish people, and I want to respect them. But those who I did talk to about their ability to freely express themselves, it actually reminded me a lot of being in Trump's America. But with us, it's like through technology, through them, it's like they have to be very cautious about how they organize because they will be rounded up. It depends on what community you're from in the United States, but there's surveillance everywhere. And I just think it's going to get worse depending on what your background is. If you're Kurdish, this is bad.
The next 5 or 6 days are gonna be rather telling, and we should say that right after the supposed ceasefire, there was fighting continued along the border. Now that happens after ceasefires, but what was more relevant was just the way that essentially Turkey was characterizing it. It's not a ceasefire. It's just basically saying, like, we're going to give you a little time to get out.
Well,
then we're going to start.
The other aspect of this is from the EU's perspective, they're doing everything they can right now to control the refugee flow. Because depending on what country you're from, whether it's Poland that just basically like shuts them out, or Germany, which, has opened their arms to refugees, or Greece, of course, the pathway is really complicated. Like I was thinking about it while I was in Greece. I was like, wait, how are they getting on? But why don't they just go up through landmass and it has to do with these restrictive countries like Poland where they're blocking. Right. So that's why they're getting on the boats, and it's extraordinarily dangerous in the Mediterranean waters. And it's actually, the distance is even that large. It's a small distance. It's just going to get worse. And, that destabilizes the EU. That actually is a huge cost to the EU. Not that we should ever look at it from that perspective, but they're already having those problems, and this isn't, as you said, a member-ish of NATO. How does this affect the stability of the of the world, frankly? Right.
It's a little bit scary. And Donald Trump, of course, has said that it's terrific and fine. So we're okay. Meanwhile, let's turn to the other half a dozen important stories that took place yesterday. The Mick Mulvaney.
It's my favorite story.
This is the quid pro quo, or the other one?
Oh yeah, there's two Nick Mulvaney. The G7 one.
Okay, yeah. I guess we could start with the G7. And one wonders if, I don't know, here it's hard to impart to Trump and the administration like some type of strategy. But I think tactics wise, I think it's fair to say that Trump understands, like, It doesn't matter. You can just keep putting stuff out there. And if something's a little bit less controversial, I'd rather have people talking about this than that. And we'll get back to the that. But the this is that Mick Mulvaney went out and did his press, did a press availability. And they don't do many press. I mean, we don't see this anymore, right? There's no more like.
Well, he's a chief of staff, number one.
Right.
So,
but we don't see even like White House press briefings really anymore.
how many days? 200 and something? 300?
And so here's Mick Mulvaney coming out to talk about the fact that the White House did a rigorous search for where to hold the G7 summit. And through their rigor and a series of vetting committees and analyses that they ran, they found that the best location that could exist for the G7 would be in Florida. In fact, at coincidentally, the Trump Doral Hotel.
That have been used by past administrations. There's a long list of the accommodations on site, the ballrooms, bilateral rooms, the number of rooms, the photo ops, the support hotels that are there, the proximity to cities and airports, helicopter landing zones, medical facilities, etc. So we use the same set of criteria that previous administrations have used. We started with a list of about a dozen just on paper. And we sent an advanced team out to actually visit 10 locations in several states. We visited California, Colorado, Florida, Hawaii, Michigan, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Utah. We got that list down to just under 10, and the advanced team went out to visit those. And from there, we got down to 4 finalists that our senior team went out to look at. They looked at, I think it was 1 in Hawaii, 2 in Utah, and then the Mar-a-Lago facility in Florida. And it became apparent at the end of that process that Doral was by far and away the best physical facility for this meeting. In fact, I was talking to one of the advanced teams when they came back, and I said, what was it like? And he said, Mick, you're not going to believe this, but it's almost like they built this facility to host this type of event. If any of you have been there, you know that there's separate buildings with their own rooms, separate and apart from each building, so that one country could have a building, another country could have another. You folks could have your building for the press, and obviously the common areas are going to be perfect for our needs down there. Again, anticipating your questions, how is this not an emoluments?
Right, yeah, that's a good question, actually. I would start with that one. How is this not an emoluments problem? I mean, I wish we had footage of the look on the reporters' faces as he's saying this, and they're all just going like, are you serious?
You can hear them laughing. Did you hear the point where someone
is cracking up?
When this happened, I was at Fox News, ready to go on, and then there was another press conference, and so I'm just Googling, where's the Korah? I wanted to know who owned it, because, he licenses his name out. So I'm thinking, well, maybe does like Russia own it? Does China? Who the hell knows who actually? Turkey, for all we know, could own it. But then I when I was doing it, just in May, there was a report saying that Trump's prized Doral Resort is in steep decline, according to company documents showing his business problems are mounting. How opportunistic.
I mean, I'm surprised he didn't have pictures of like, look at these kids having fun there. It's a family place, and it's basically an infomercial for the hotel. And I meing, do you, I would like to see, I hope someone is foiling all those trips that they took to go check out all these different places. We sent people far and wide. We sent people across the country. We went from sea to shining sea to find the best resort in the country. And it turns out to be Donald Trump's resort. Can you
The one
imagine?
that's also in decline.
Yeah. There we go.
Surprise.
Thank you.
The other thing is, this is a golf resort, and we know Donald Trump loves to golf. But I was just thinking about these meetings, like how many, I know some of them, when they go to Camp David, when they've been at Camp David, which is the history traditionally, they're not recorded meetings, but there is something intimate and odd about having meetings on a golf course. And I was thinking about that the other day, like he spent a third of his presidency on the golf course meeting with people.
Yep. I think it's hard to imagine that they didn't do this as a way of sort of distracting and changing the news cycle. However, despite the fact that it was clear that Mick Mulvaney was out there announcing that after a rigorous search, they were going to hold the G7 at Donald Trump's hotel as a way of turning the page, maybe, or at least getting the news off of the huge disaster that the Turkey and northern Syria, not to mention the impeachment. Mick Mulvaney, apparently, from what I understand, CNN reports that he was not briefed about what to say about the impeachment stuff. And so he was on a slightly different page than the entire legal team of the administration, which has been trying to argue there's no quid pro quo here.
He's the acting chief of staff.
Yes.
Yeah. But to be fair, the legal team is Rudy Giuliani and his 5 detained associates.
Well, to be fair, too, it's also Jay Sekulow, and he, I think, had to do the drive time radio show in Boston. So isn't that where he does it or something like that? But
sounds right.
Yeah. Here is Mick Mulvaney making what we would call probably, I think the technical term is a boo-boo.
Actors. Did he also mention to me in the past the corruption related to the DNC server? Absolutely. No question about that. But that's it. And that's why we held up the money. Now, there was a report.
So the demand for an investigation into the Democrats was part of the reason that he ordered to withhold funding to Ukraine.
The look back to what happened in 2016 certainly was part of the thing that he was worried about in corruption with that nation. And that is absolutely appropriate.
Withholding the funding.
Yeah, which ultimately then flowed. By the way, there was a report that we were worried that the money wouldn't, if we didn't pay out the money, it would be illegal. Okay, it would be unlawful. That is one of those things that has that little shred of truth in it that makes it look a lot worse than it really is. We were concerned about in our over at OMB about an impoundment, and I know I just put half you folks to bed, but there's the Budget Control Act, Budget Control Impoundment Act of 1974 says that if Congress appropriates money, you have to spend it. Okay, at least that's how it's interpreted by some folks. And we knew that money either had to go out the door by the end of September, or we had to have a really, really good reason not to do it. And that was the legality of the issue.
But to be clear, what you just described is a quid pro quo. It is funding will not flow unless the investigation into the Democratic server happened as well.
We do that all the time with foreign policy. We were holding up money at the same time for what was it? The Northern Triangle countries. We were holding up aid at the Northern Triangle countries so that they would change their policies on immigration. By the way, and this speaks to an important. I'm sorry. This speaks to an important point.
Yeah, their policies on immigration, I mean, arguably, maybe has something to do with sort of U.S. interests. Harder to make the case that asking them to pursue a conspiracy theory that they think will vindicate the president is really in national interest.
Right.
But Mick Mulvaney comes out, says, yeah, it's quid pro quo. We do it all the time. And now he doesn't acknowledge, and nobody asks him in that exchange, as far as I can tell. Well, how come he also brought up Burisma and Biden in that phone call? I mean, we know he did. And it would have been interesting to see if Mick would be that far off the script. However, later in the day, he put out a written statement saying that, no, I didn't mean that. I didn't say there was a quid pro quo.
Take it back, Mick.
He's on the way out, right? Isn't it?
I mean, no.
Aren't they about to fight? Not him. Like, he's not choosing to be on the way out. Wasn't the rumor last week that he was about to be canned?
No, I don't think so. I think that was Rick Perry.
I know that one.
No,
there's just too many to keep up with, guys. Come on.
I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't cut him loose after this on some. This is a pretty major screw up for those people who want to argue that there was no quid pro quo, to have the acting chief of staff say, right. Yeah, no, of course. Of course there was.
At this point,
and also on top of that, there's like a thread of truth that it was illegal for us to withhold the money. Like, I mean, there was. Yesterday I did had an exchange with Tim Pool. I think they're going to release it this week, and we spent a long time. he had a lot of different Ukrainian theories about depositions that had taken place in Ukraine, saying that the Bidens had done this and that, and who knows if it's illegal, and we can't really know the truth. There's two different sides of it, and that's why impeachment's not going to be good. We also argued the political side, and we'll get to those polls in a moment, that he was a little surprised existed. But, I mean, there was a moment where I said, look, you have the sort of the moral, not moral, but the ethical and the sort of the hold people who are in power to account. And it's quite clear that there was a tremendous amount of, if not illegality, inappropriateness that warrants an impeachment in terms of what a president can and cannot do, or should and should not do. But the other aspect of that is the political one. Mm-hmm. And we now know that, I now know, as of yesterday, I thought, we're hovering at around 50% who want impeachment. And I cited the Fox News poll, and he told me, well, that oversampled Democrats, because of those Fox News polls always do that. And he had some numbers, and I'm like, well, okay, fine. Go Google what the Real Clear Politics average is. And it turned out to be 52%.
Right.
So it's a little bit higher than he thought.
And with
but
Republicans,
that was irrelevant.
And with Republicans, it's going up.
It's gone up 20 some odd points amongst Republicans, independents, and Democrats are through the roof.
Right.
And more importantly, I have here a polling that shows that you have Republican senators, 2020s. I'll read this off. Susan Collins, since February of 2019, her net approval rating has dropped 2 points to -6. Tom Tillis has dropped 3 points to -5. Joni Ernst has lost 9 points.
That's great.
In favorability. She's at -4 now. Cory Gardner has dropped 3 to -3. Martha McSally has dropped 1 to just 2 points positive. Doug Jones in Alabama, gone up 3 points.
Unbelievable.
He's up at 5. He's a 5 a net.
Wow.
And Gary Peters in Michigan, up 1. And John Cornyn in Texas, the only one who has had no change. These are the most vulnerable Senate Republicans. Iowa voters soured on Joni Ernst by 9 points. And you can see it the way that she's talking about stuff. She is definitely trying to say we need to hold the president to account, sort of. And she's got to walk that tightrope. I mean, from a political standpoint, all the stuff that's coming out of here, what would be your perspective on how the Democrats should approach impeachment at this point?
At this point, Donald Trump is creating his own impeachment every day. I mean, I think it's very hard with impeachment to look back on previous impeachments. Everyone has been saying it's bad politically because of we lost the midterms and blah blah blah, but there's really no case study. We're in a presidential year, and despite the fact that it might not be done.
You don't think Andrew Johnson's experience holds here?
I actually don't.
Okay, fair enough.
Very good point. I will pick up that book again and reread it from a decade ago. That won the Pulitzer. No, I think I think that the scenario is about the Senate. And I think you've been really smart to lay that out. In every state also where we have an early primary like Iowa, not only is Joni Ernst doing it to herself, but you have Democrats literally like blanketing Iowa with an anti-impeachment, anti-Trump message. And like, this is what we want to be as a party. And I think Iowa's a very mavericky state like Arizona is. And Democrats aren't invested in Alabama. So that's why you see a Doug Jones doing so well right now, despite the fact that the president is losing popularity. So overall, I think it's a good scenario for Democrats, especially in states where there's real presidential primaries, because that message, the more you invest in the message, the more people everybody.
Democratic primaries or
Democratic. I mean, there's no. Okay, great. He has a Republican primary, but
well,
see how that
I mean, there's
plays
some
out.
states that have canceled the primary.
Right.
I mean, there's like a half a dozen states that have canceled that primary. But so wait, so the point being that the states where you have early primaries are seeing more messages from Democrats that we
Yes.
need to impeach this president, and it's creating pressure
Yes.
on their Republican opponents.
On the Republican opponents.
So in some ways, what you're saying is that, if I'm not mistaken, that what we're watching with Joni Ernst is an early indicator of what's going to happen
Right.
to Susan Collins and what's going to happen to Tom Tillis and what's going to happen to Cory Gardner
Hopefully.
when this impeachment message sort of like gets blasted in their state.
Right. And the message
That's
is working because Donald Trump isn't doing anything to counter it. You know, in the past, again, we can't look at past impeachments for a whole array of reasons.
Right.
This is a presidential election. There's going to be over $1 billion spent just on the Democratic side, you know, after the general election. This is why Democrats have to compete in every state. Every state you compete in, every state that you invest in is your message getting out. And when you don't invest in that message, the Republicans take over.
Fill the vacuum.
Fill the vacuum, exactly. And I think Democrats are starting to see that. I mean, with Maine, for instance, Emily's List is pushing their candidate very hard. I mean, Maine is an unusual state, but there is a possibility, you know, given the weaknesses, that we could win. We could
Yep.
win back that seat. And that makes all the difference.
Yep.
But we could lose the presidency, let's be clear.
Teresa Greenfield, backed by the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee and Emily's List, outraised Ernst
Yep.
in Iowa. In Arizona, Mark Kelly, and he's going to be probably my third least favorite senator if he wins.
I don't know if he's going to win that one.
He's outraised McSally. And you're right. She's dropping. She hasn't dropped, as precipitously as the others, but she's now at 2 net.
She's never been, you know, a Trump advocate. She's fairly moderate. Put her back, you know, next to Mark Kelly, and you'd be like, what's the difference?
Well, there will be a big difference if
In the
Mitch
vote.
McConnell
Yes.
allows a vote in the Senate,
Yes.
right? That's why I don't think he will ever allow us.
Right.
He says he will, but he will not. He will find some reason why it's an illegitimate impeachment inquiry, and he will not hold the vote, because if he holds the vote, Mark Kelly's job is
Literally,
it's
that's
just sitting right there for him.
Yeah.
How do I make a distinction? How do I tie her to Trump? She voted to protect him.
That's right.
And that's the vote that she desperately doesn't want to take.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I think Mitch McConnell is full of it.
And that's what McCain was so famous for. Arizona's a weird state that I think Democrats are just starting to figure out. It's not traditional conservatives, and it's not traditional Democrats or independents. It's very mavericky, very populist, very libertarian, and it's why John McCain could get away with voting against Republicans on health care and many issues, not all, but many issues, because of that.
Or at the very least, talk about it.
Talk about it,
I don't know if
exactly.
he voted as much as he did talk about it in those scenarios. But I guess dipping in with the impeachment stuff just a little bit more. I mean, how do you think the Democrats should handle it insofar as like hearings? I mean, do you think this is something they should wrap up quickly? It seems like that. I'm not hearing that as much from Nancy Pelosi. You know, 3 weeks ago, she's like, we're going to do this quick. And now it seems like there's a lot of stuff to cover here.
I have no idea. I mean, it's all happening behind closed doors, and the message is changing. On one hand, it seems to be working for Democrats on the Senate side, as we just said. But when you go back down into the districts, people want to hear, what are the Democrats offering us? What's the actual difference? Let's talk about Medicare for all. Let's talk about education. Let's talk about, you know, all the issues, the bread and butter table issues dinner table issues that people vote on. But it's also working. So,
Right.
I mean, I really think we're in uncharted territory. People, I think, are now like, oh, this guy actually might go down. This is fascinating, including myself. I was tuning it out.
Right.
And I'm now like, wait, what? What's happening? Is Mick Mulvaney the next one out? I think the country is starting to pay attention, as they do in all elections, right? They pay attention, you know, when it starts to matter.
Right.
And the same thing with impeachment. It's a good fundraising opportunity for a lot of Democrats.
It's been a good one for Trump, too.
The progressives that are advocating for the Green New Deal and Medicare for all are the ones who pushed for impeachment. So at the end of the day, you know, you can chew gum and walk as Democrats as long as you make sure to walk.
That's right. The most ambitious policies that the Democrats are offering
Right.
came from the most aggressive pro-impeachment freshman Democrats,
Right.
frankly.
I do wonder if it's giving something to the centrist Democrats that they can run on. and giving sort of like an uneven advantage there, right? Like if the progressive Democrats have real material issues like Medicare for All and the Green New Deal, and they're running on that, and the centrist Democrats have basically the same nothing as always, and they're running on that, wouldn't impeachment give sort of an uneven advantage to the centrists in a way?
I don't know. I mean, you look at some of these
hold on.
primaries.
Are you, just to clarify, are you saying in the primaries or in the general elections?
In the primaries right now, but maybe both. I don't know.
It's strange because I was just looking at the fundraising numbers for congressional candidates, and it's still a little early.
Right.
A little early, not too early. And the numbers just came out, and it seems like for the most part, with exception to a few key races where they're getting a lot of attention, you know, the Adam Schiffs of the world, the Jerry Nadlers of the world, the Carolyn Maloneys of the world still have an extraordinary amount of money and are raising that money. I don't know if it's off of impeachment or if it's just the establishment is really protecting them the way that they didn't for what's our old congressman's name?
Crowley.
Crowley. I forgot his name.
Well, I think there's
Exactly.
a much greater awareness that like,
Right.
wait, we could this insurgency is real now.
It's the return of the establishment, as
Yeah.
a friend of mine said. But with that being said, you know, there's also more progressives running. Some of these primaries are split, which is not great for progressives. And I think that's a great message for anybody who's thinking about running for office. When you have 3 progressives in a race against one establishment candidate, it's very hard to raise money when you're a progressive and there's one candidate to choose. Not saying that it should be that way all the time, but it ends up, that's a scenario that ends up happening. But, you know, Carolyn Maloney, you know, she was just because of the death of, my God, I'm like losing it today. Who died yesterday? Representative Cummings.
Cummings.
Thank you. So because of the death of Cummings, she was just put into his position on the oversight committee.
Oh,
so,
did she become the chairwoman of oversight? Oh,
yeah.
and that's got to be. I mean, that's a protection racket right
That's
there.
a protection racket right there. So at the end of the day, I mean, she's the one who's out there campaigning for impeachment, raising money off of it, and is in this position. They're just going to back her up even more so.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to help her. I think, no doubt, in that primary challenge, because she's also going to be on TV. I mean, she's head of the oversight committee. It's, you know, putting aside, if there was no impeachment, she would still have that huge advantage because there's all sorts of reasons why you would hear from the government oversight committee when you're talking about, you know, what the Trump administration is doing, emoluments, a whole host of other things too. But I think I don't know that it works for it necessarily works for all of the incumbents, that it helps them, the impeachment stuff.
Right.
I definitely think it helps both incumbents and progressives in the general election, without a doubt. I mean, I think it's such a value add going up against a Republican, particularly if you're a challenger and they have to take this vote. Now, the Republicans in the House will have to take the vote. Mm-hmm. And I think that's going to make it much harder in many respects for them to take back the House if there was any chance of them doing that. Because, I mean, even in those frontline districts, I just saw some polling. Cheryl Bustos sent out a memo saying we got to be very careful because it's only a 2-point net positive in terms of impeachment in these districts. And that's a tough way to
swing districts that she's
These are
talking
the
about?
swing districts. These are the frontline Democrats, like the 7 or 8, you know, most sort of like at-risk seats that the Democrats hold. There's still a net positive for impeachment in these districts.
Right.
So that's very hard to raise the sort of like alarm bell and say we shouldn't do this.
And that's where they're actually, a lot of those seats are being primaried right now. You have the Cisneros district in Texas, right? So these are flippable districts. And I think, you know, if you're an incumbent, going back to your original point, and, you know, there's this delicate dance between getting through your primary when you have certain targeted primary opponents that are raising $300,000 or $800,000. I mean, some of these races, the challengers are raising an extraordinary amount of money because just as the DCCC will target specific districts, now progressive groups are targeting specific districts. And so at the end of the day, if a challenger does win and beat that incumbent, now that challenger has to go and run against a Republican, and
If the vote
where-
gets taken, I think it puts Republicans in a tough position.
Yeah.
I think it just does. I mean, because we can see even in these districts, you got 2 percentage points of in favor of impeachment on top of everything else that the Democrats may or may not offer in that instance. Even if the challenger, the Republican challenger, doesn't take the vote,
Right.
they have to answer how they would vote, right? I mean, because if they say I would vote against the president in most of these districts, they're going to lose, like almost like in that instant. 10, 20% of their base is just going to say like, no, I stand with the president. I'm not going to come out and I'm not going to vote for you ever. And under any circumstance, I think these people will walk away.
How do you think that's going to play out in with RNC? I mean, is RNC going to back the president? Lindsey Graham pulled away again. How do you think this is going to trickle down into communities where?
I think to a certain extent, the Republicans view what's going on with Turkey as like a gift because it gives them some reason to separate themselves from the president on foreign policy that they can make, where they feel like they have the military on their side. This not abandoning the Kurds also dovetails nicely if you're a war hawk,
right?
Because you want to be able to have proxy wars, and this is going to inhibit our ability to have proxy wars. And so I think they perceive this as a gift. I think this lets Lindsey Graham sort of like have it both ways. But this is either going to turn into a disaster that it's going to be much harder to continue to support the president, or it's just we're not going to be talking about it in 6 to 8 months, but we will be talking about impeachment in 6 to 8 months. And so I think from a political standpoint, I just don't think they can afford to distance themselves from Donald Trump. I mean, there's a certain, higher percentage of Republicans that are supporting impeachment, but at the end of the day, there's still 50% of the Republican Party, period. Unless Donald Trump is naked on the White House lawn chasing, that little boy in that picture of the lawnmower, I don't think they're going to abandon him. And I think not only are they not going to abandon him, I think they're going to go after whomever tries to take Trump down.
Well, look at Mitt Romney, for instance. Mitt Romney is contrasting himself. He lives in Utah. Utah is a state, even though it's extremely red, it is extremely anti-Trump.
It's probably the only state in the country where you could get away with that.
Maybe Arizona. I mean, to an extent. Arizona is not all Trump crazy.
Right.
There's a large Mormon population in Arizona as well. So, I mean, one seat here, one seat there, you've got Lindsey Graham challenging him, and then suddenly, there isn't going to be some sort of chorus of...
I just don't... I think that it could happen that way, but I think that the support for Trump is too rock solid and too big in the Republican Party. And because it's also, you got to remember, it's not like, that doesn't happen in a vacuum.
Right.
Donald Trump if he starts to see erosion with the Republicans, he's going to go at them. And you're going to get Mark Levin, and you're going to get Sean Hannity, and you're going to get the whole crew on their radio shows. And, that's how the Republicans lose, is that they are at the Trumpistas basically say, no way. I mean, it's not like Donald Trump's going to be quiet about it.
Right.
He's not going to take the lumps. He's going to go out and he's going to attack these people.
And you see it in his donations. I mean, those small dollar donations blew me away.
Yeah.
Because it's one thing to say that Russia created this man and there was a pseudo social media support of him. But at the end of the day, those small dollar donations are very real and very competitive.
Yep. All right.
Joe Biden ain't got him.
No. We're going to take a quick break, head into the fun half, and we've got a lot of clips to take a look at. Also, just a stunning story of the White House. This is, if there was ever a trial to see, how many sociopaths are in that White House now, we would we'll show you that clip. Folks, a reminder, it's your support that makes this show possible. You can become a member by going to jointhemajorityreport.com. Jointhemajorityreport.com. And don't forget, go right now, because you can listen to the show live on your app. Go and download the Majority Report app. It's at majorityapp.com. It gives you access to the YouTube channel, tells you how to support the show, et cetera, et cetera. You can listen to the AM Quickie, super easy. You can listen to the podcast. You can log in as a member, and we have a new super easy way to log in now. If you forget your email, if you forget your password, all you got to do is click a button, and we'll send you a one-time key through your email address. So it's super easy to log in. And once you log in, you can search archives. And the episode archives is super easy to search. Let's see. How about we'll search Nomi?
Uh-oh. Oh, no.
Let's see. Let's see what happens here. I wish we could.
Which hit pieces come up first?
Oh, wait. No, but this is just on this show, so we don't have any hit pieces.
It doesn't go through Google. Okay, you said Google.
No, this is just... so, Nomi, you've been on this show quite a bit. Somehow you came up during, and I don't know, I have to look in the... we had you on the fun half. I'm not exactly sure why you're in that. I got to check that out, but showed up 123, 124... 125, January 29th. There you are, February 8th. Don't know the year on that. Also, let's see, February 14th. Maybe we were talking about you in the in your race. That's what it was. Yep.
Because you guys were plugging. That was so nice of you.
9/11 you were on.
Oh, I do remember that was this year.
Yeah, I have it all there in the app. So check it out, majorityapp.com. Also, check out our Instagram page, majorityreport.fm on Instagram. Good stuff happening over there. And as always, justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority, get 10% off. Naomi, do you want to plug your Twitter follow?
I was just tweeting someone back, actually. I was talking about languages. They're like, well, this would help you with your language. I'm like, oh, I've tried that.
Well, go find Naomi on Twitter. Jamie?
Nomiki Konst.
Well, I'll just remind you, today is Friday, and so Wednesday happened this week. TMBS was on a special night because of the...
had a Ryan Grimm in studio.
Ryan Grimm was in studio,
and had a good conversation on the whole Bernie versus Warren debate.
Well, we never hear that.
Never talk about that.
That never happens anymore. No one ever talks about that. We never hear that.
Well, if you want a little break from the Bernie Warren debate, you can listen to this bonus episode of the Antifada that just came out today for our patrons. Oh! Yeah, that's right. It is the first episode of Andy's new side project in which he focuses on Latin American politics and history. So in this one, he speaks with the bread tuber Bad Empanada about the upcoming elections in Argentina that will return Kirchnerismo to power after 4 years of Mauricio Macri's neoliberal buffoonery. But can left populist Peronism walk the country back from the brink of economic collapse? Or will there be a new insurrection like in the year 2000? And who do the Posadists support? That's right, there's still Posadists in Argentina. After that, they discuss the life and politics of Che Guevara and the claims that he was a blood-soaked homophobic murderer. They talk about the excesses of the Cuban government, the extent of Che's role in them, and some of their favorite stories of the revolution and after. Check it out, folks. Patreon.com/The Antifada. Also, I've got an op-ed in Protean Mag called It's Not That Surprising That Ellen is Friends with Bush and Other Crimes of Hollywood Liberalism. So check it out.
And put a link to that on the podcast today. Matt?
And they had the worst cover-up ever.
We'll be talking about the Salem witch trials in the upcoming Literary Hangover episode as a state cover-up. The increase in Cotton Mather kind of really fanned the flames there, and then took to books to cover up their role in that. Ooh. And it really discredited the theocracy at the end of the 17th century there. So we'll be talking about that. So Literary Hangover, subscribe on YouTube or on your podcast feed.
Who knew? All right.
I'm going to listen to that.
See you in the fun half. 646-257-3920.
That's so
Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
You know, I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous. You're a little bit upset. You're riled up.
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude. You want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
That's good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457. 2, 38, 56, 27. 1/2. 5 eighths. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy!
Dance, dance, dance. I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
That guy might be a Nazi.
Agree.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook. Throw our hands up.
Ooh.
Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me...
Hey, shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
It's me directing Busey, and there was a guy... Yeah, I know. Horrible. Folks, welcome. It is the fun half. I of course did not call in, but we will call into the show right now.
You're too busy talking about Gary Busey.
I was too busy talking about Gary Busey. That comes up now and then, and it gives me a stomach ache.
He is fascinating.
Busey was. He gets unfascinating quick. Let me tell you that.
I believe
like
that.
A child.
Yeah, it gets unfascinating super quick in that scenario. Now let's go back to Mick Mulvaney talking about the G7. They're going to be in Florida. It's going to be the summer, I believe, right? Is it going to be when is it going to be? In June? As you know, Miami will probably be underwater permanently within 20 years, I think they're saying. They really can't stop it because Miami is built on essentially a sponge, limestone, and it is porous. And so as the sea level rises, the water will not be washing up from the shores. There's no sea wall that you can build. It will actually literally be coming from inside the city, as it were.
It does right now. They have floods in these
constantly. And so, of course, you would think that being in an area which is the canary in the coal mine, as it were, geographically for climate change, at least within the context of this country, you would imagine that the G7 would be addressing global climate change.
It's almost like they worked with the Democrats.
Yeah, it's almost. I mean, this is exactly where you would do it in this country. Right. I think if you wanted to really highlight climate change, but of course, if you were to think that, you would be incredibly naive.
You said, is there any precedent in your studying of the G7 of a G7 summit being held at a property owned by the president or a president? And my second question is, as you're looking at the content of what you want to do next year, it's probably going to be hot in Florida in June. Will climate change be one of the issues that you discussed?
The first question is, no, I don't know if another president has ever done it. I don't know if another president has owned a property that was even considered for G7. So no, we haven't. I don't know the answer to that question. Climate change will not be on the agenda. Yes, sir.
There you go. Well, they gave it some thought.
Well, Florida is also the YOLO state.
That's
and
right.
the state where people have too many snakes. So, you never know.
Well, why? Yeah. Why?
We also have an aged population, especially in the South, that's like, as long as I last another 5 years.
Yeah, I guess that's the theory. What's going on here with my...
But are we surprised? I mean, the Democrats wouldn't even do it. This is the reality we live in now.
Right.
There is no reality. That's the reality we live in.
Yeah, they're not doing shit.
No.
Even the Paris Climate Accord was not nearly enough to actually do what we need to do to prevent the most extreme cases of warming.
I think that's true, but my understanding is that it also was like the first time they've been able to sort of agree on something like that, and it was a good first step. Of course, sometimes you can have one step forward and two steps back, and that's sort of, I think, where we're at this point.
Neoliberal agenda.
Let's go to the phones. Calling from a 308 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam, it's Kowalski from Nebraska.
Kowalski from Nebraska. How are you, sir?
Oh, not too bad.
What's on your mind today?
So, as you're aware, I'm going to be starting the campaign here pretty soon, but I recently came across something I think you'll find fairly interesting.
Okay.
So I was talking to some retired mayors about my views on Medicare for all. They seem to really like it. Oddly enough, they say they won't publicly support it because they won't do it unless it's like popular among the base. But they did mention something that I found pretty fascinating, and pretty much anybody I mentioned it to absolutely loves the idea. So with Medicare for all, they basically said if it was also going to go towards like assisted living centers and elderly care, they said not only would it be more popular, but pretty much nobody here would vote against it because anybody in small towns would want that. So it's actually extremely popular. I mean, I've got left-leaning friends, right-leaning friends, libertarians. They all love it. People want their elderly relatives to stay in their hometowns.
When you say the base, these mayors, well, the base of what? The base of the Democratic Party or the Republican Party?
Republicans. If you find a Democrat here, I think we're supposed to tag them and monitor them because they're in danger.
All right. Well, fair enough. That's interesting. That'll be interesting. That's a good point. That is one of the things, and thanks for the call, Kowalski. That is one of the things that I think has been sort of lacking in this debate as we've seen it in the context of the debates, right? It's all about how do you pay for it.
Right.
I don't think that to the extent that, and Bernie has spoken very eloquently on this, and Warren has to some extent as well, about the problems with the system we have now.
Right.
But on some level, they're not selling the benefits in the way, like they're not selling the benefits. He says no premiums, no copays, and this and that, but they could spend a lot more time, it seems to me, on like how good this is going to be.
Well, even for small business. This is ultimately why people hate Obamacare.
But what Kowalski was saying right there, right now, we have 2/3 of elderly who are in nursing homes are paid for by Medicaid.
Yep.
However, in most states, in fact, I think I don't know the specifics in every state. I happen to know what it is in Massachusetts. You need to be essentially down to your last $2,000 in assets. And any money that you've spent up to that point can be clawed back against what you can get from Medicaid. I mean, it's a horrible process. It means that you won't have the ability to leave anything to your kids.
Right.
$5,000, $10,000. I've been saving up my whole life, to give my kids whatever it is, any type of help. I think your car doesn't count towards it. I think even your house actually depends on the state as to whether it's an asset that cuts against your ability to pay for the nursing home. I mean, you really need to be basically without assets in vast majority of states, maybe all the states. I mean, they each have sort of specific rules, and that's very problematic. And the idea, I think, the Medicare for all, you're going to be dealing with nursing homes, and you're going to be making sure that our elderly care for. And it's becoming, obviously, the baby boomers are hitting the ages now. And so you don't hear that as much. Like, we don't hear, and part of it's because of the way these questions are framed, but Bernie and Warren and others who actually genuinely support Medicare for all should be pivoting on these questions and saying, we've heard about the payments, but let's talk about why the public option version will fail.
That's right.
And what you get with this. I mean, because that's the way you do any type of sales, is always like, I'm going to get them pregnant with what they want. And then once they're pregnant, I'm going to say, that's the vernacular. And then you say, this is what it's going to cost.
Or even if they were to address the costs, Washington Post published something yesterday, I believe, and it was not bad, but it was essentially saying the costs are going to be the same for the most part. The studies are all varied and pretty much all over the place, but it's an employment tax. And so they need to have a one-liner response. Shut it down and pivot. It's like debate 101. I don't know who these people, I love Bernie. I love Warren. I love how Bernie stays on message, but the numbers are going down in terms of approval. And that is a big concern because it's happening very quickly. And I do think that these debates and the right-wing media and the op-eds are having an effect. And if you don't have a counter message, that's what's going to be in people's minds. And it's enough in a 12-way race that it actually could impact, whether or not they win in Iowa or New Hampshire. They got to come up with an answer. And Warren not having an answer hurts Bernie. Or Bernie needs to take over that conversation and say, listen, I understand that Senator Warren is whatever, come up with some sort of answer.
Right.
But how about I help you out here? I know this because I wrote the bill and she signed on, but I'm really familiar with this.
Right.
Well, we knew that all of the other candidates were going to muddy the waters and appropriate the Medicare for all language in a way that is very confusing to people. So it really is, I agree, it's on Bernie Sanders particularly because he's the one with the strongest Medicare for all plan. He's the one with the real single payer plan that's actually going to work. It's on him and to some degree Warren to explain why the other plans are not Medicare for all and why they're not going to work.
I think Warren has tongue-tied him. And he's so afraid to go after her that he doesn't know how to. This actually helps her too. This helps everybody. And I he needs to kind of own that space. And it's frustrating, having endorsements like the squad are great and it'll change the media narrative and it'll pivot back to, his strengths. But at the end of the day, this is about, can you get over the hump in New Hampshire, a state that you won easily last time around.
Right.
And you're in third place in right now. where Medicare for All is extremely popular, by the way, in New Hampshire.
Yeah, they've got to go out and just, I think, be a little bit more aggressive on the benefits. Because I think there's just an assumption that everybody knows that. And I just don't think that people do. They just hear that and they think it's something good, but they don't know how good.
Right.
And I don't know. I mean, I feel like, I go through it with my kids just trying to get money back. My son goes to an eye doctor. He's had some eye problems and, the doctor's not covered by insurance or he doesn't take insurance. And so I've got to submit the stuff and hope that I get whatever it is.
Or even
50% back or 70% back or whatever it is.
Right.
And it's just the whole process is a complete nightmare.
That's it.
Well, they need to hammer on the idea that it's going to be free at point of service for everyone always. Like we saw those survey questions the other day that didn't even mention that fact. Like that's the best part of Medicare for All.
I think even saying free at point of service is too abstract.
Like you can get as much health care as you need and you never have to pay for it when you get it.
I think honestly saying something about what Kowalski said, like make it clear, like your parents are going to be able to go into a nursing home.
Right.
And, and something specific like that. And you're going to be able to go and see a dentist.
Yep.
And if you have problems with your eyes, it's not going to cost you $1,000 to get a pair of glasses.
Mm-hmm.
These, get as specific as possible. This is from 1966? Is this?
Whenever the NHS was.
The NHS.
Yeah.
No, Mike Konst had was posting some stuff yesterday, I think, about there was in 1993 they had some type of symposium about the people who actually instituted Medicare,
mm-hmm.
and they said it was super easy. They did it within a year.
Right.
And now there wasn't competing health insurance in the same way that there is today, and this and that, but the idea is. And they're comparing it to the ACA on some level, which is like, the ACA, this is how you operate the ACA. You got to see if you're eligible for the exchanges. You got to go and find out you got to prove your income. You got to make sure that your income's going to stay the same for the next amount of period of time, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, if you go through, this is a thread that people should look at. And if you go through, and then as opposed to open the envelope, here's your card, you're done. Boom.
So much better.
Let's listen to this because I don't think we can present it enough because you characterized the race to me before we went on air about what's happening in terms of like give me your perspective on the race because this guy plays, I think he sees something. And I'm talking about Pete Buttigieg.
Yep.
And I think it's what you were articulating to me.
So Pete, I covered the DNC chairs race. And to me, the DNC chairs race was...
I don't think people remember he ran.
Yeah, exactly. So he ran and everyone was like, who is this guy? And what folks may not understand about the DNC chairs race is very, very similar to this race. It was a multi-way race, 12 people. And I don't even know what it was in the beginning. And it really whittled down to power brokering. And I think, this race is a little bit different, but when you go into Iowa, for instance, and you're not in the top two, if you remember what happened last time around, suddenly those votes become a bargaining chip, a tool. But here we are, 2 months before the Iowa caucus, 3 months before the Iowa caucuses and New Hampshire. And historically in other presidential races, the race has shifted drastically in November. Like, who's a front runner in October is not a front runner or even on the map in November. This has happened several times in history. So right now you have Joe Biden, who's a supposed front runner. He even calls himself that. He has $9 million cash on hand. That is extremely low. It will not last him to New Hampshire. So if he loses in Iowa, if he loses in New Hampshire, and his firewall is in South Carolina, which is where Joe Biden is doing very well right now, that's an African-American base, he may not make it to South Carolina. And if he loses, the narrative shifts and suddenly the power dynamics shift. Who is going to probably take over? At least that's where he sees his lane is Pete Buttigieg. He's raising money. He's got a lot of cash on hand. His values align. His staff is a lot of former Obama people. You see the overlap there. I actually don't see, and I think this is what Warren is trying to do by not answering how much Medicare for All is going to cost because she doesn't want to be labeled a socialist. I think what she's trying to do is really pull, and she has been, from the Biden support. Now, let's look back at the polls. Biden, those who vote for Biden, majority of people who choose Biden first, the majority choose Bernie second. So there's a real opportunity for Bernie to swoop in, but he has to be aggressive in a smart way. Not the way Pete Buttigieg was in taking swipes at everybody on stage, but really differentiating himself and calling out their strategy. You don't have to attack them, but call out their strategy. Pete is... There's donor overlap. I think that a lot of Biden's donors have gone to his side. I think Pete is looking to build his centrist path as being the new Obama. Keep in mind, even if he isn't the front runner, he's probably going to audition for vice president.
Right.
From Indiana, up on stage as a gay man from Indiana, debating, a very, very Christian, conservative, former governor of Indiana.
Right.
Indiana.
I mean, exactly.
So there's a real narrative there. Like, this is the future and that is the past. I've always thought that was his strategy from the get-go. How he got there would be complicated. But now, given that Biden's imploding, there's a real opening. So it could be a three-way race in January between Warren, Bernie, and Buttigieg. And that's concerning.
I think that is because I think that there is a feeling. Because I think the big money doesn't want Warren. I mean, I don't even think they take Bernie seriously.
No.
I think they think that Warren is the biggest threat. That they may not be right. We will have a better sense of that, I think, after Iowa, frankly. But they think, regardless of who they think that left threat is, I think they're starting to realize Joe Biden is just not going to cut it. Mm-hmm. He's just not going to make it. And they're searching around, and Buttigieg is the most obvious choice because he's the only one who's raising money. And Buttigieg must realize this too, because yesterday or 2 days ago, we played a clip of Buttigieg when he was on C-SPAN saying that Medicare for All was the compromise position. You had, on one hand, a completely free market situation. On the other hand, the NHS in Britain, and Medicare for All was the compromise plan. Mm-hmm. And of course, now he doesn't feel that it is. Here is another example. Now, to be fair, when was that clip? That clip
February.
That was from February?
Yeah.
It was a different time.
Yeah. Well, February was a different time, right? It's cold. It's like a winter, but April is also another different time. And April is actually closer to when we are now, just to show you like how quickly this guy can turn on a dime. He's like a compact car. He can really has a very high turning radius.
He's going to come out as straight tomorrow.
Yeah. Here is Buttigieg complaining about right-wing frames being used against the ACA and Medicare for All.
The right did a pretty good job of shifting the basic terms of the debate rightward over the last 30 or 40 years. In fact, the ACA itself is a good example, right? So, in the 70s, you got people like Richard Nixon talking about basically universal basic income by a different name. By the Obama years, we're doing a basically conservative tweak to our healthcare system that is characterized by the right as sort of dangerously leftist.
Well, it looks a lot like Nixon's plan, actually.
Yeah, and cooked up in the Heritage Foundation and piloted by a Republican governor. And what's funny is, single payer, which is very much a compromised position between nationalized medicine and fully private payer and provider, right? A system where you have a public payer but a private provider. That's the middle ground. And only now are we even beginning to talk about it as something Democrats can embrace, let alone something that we would consider centrist, while the majority of the American people actually think it's a good idea.
Wow, he really seemed to get it.
That's going to be a campaign ad.
I mean,
I hope so.
If I was Bernie or Warren in the next debate, I would take that quote and I would go, who said this?
Right.
And was it me or was it Elizabeth? Or, and that's what I would say if I was Bernie Sanders. And then I would go, actually, Pete, it was you.
Well, to be fair, it was when his father, the Marxist professor, was writing his talking points.
Well, so. Yeah, back in April. But I mean, that to me, how does Pete Buttigieg respond to that? I got smarter. I don't know. What does he say?
I'm a Russian nesting doll of total emptiness.
Right.
I'm willing to kill people for money if it's going to get me elected.
He will pivot. I mean, this is a McKinsey consultant. You know, the guy who talks about wholesome America and like what inner DC Beltway. He is a product of the Beltway. He's a product of Ivy Leagues. This is how he was trained. He was trained in the neoliberal art of shifting on everything constantly. I mean, I remember asking him about charter schools, and he came up with the best spin on charter schools that looped back to why the DNC their budget needed to be transparent.
He's a good pivoter.
Very good.
Well, we'll see. I would be shocked if that doesn't come up in the next debate. Because, look, the way, even the way to pull Biden supporters is to go after Buttigieg.
Right.
I think. You're showing a skill set, and you're just like, you're showing your skill set in terms of being a fighter, but you're not going after the person who, who has the support that you want. I mean, that to me seems.
Well, that's what Klobuchar's doing. That's what Pete's doing.
Yep.
Pete doesn't want Bernie's support. He's trying to
show
that he's a centrist, sellout. And Klobuchar is just doing whatever she's being told. She's the Delaney of the debates lately.
Yeah, but that's the only way she gets any time. It'll be interesting to see if she gets even a slightest bump. Have we seen any polls after that? Did she get anything out of that?
Washington Post said she was one of the winners.
Besides some solid laugh lines, you mean?
Well, no, she supposedly was the winner according to everybody. She's like one of the winner list, but what she's going to win, I think, is probably somewhere around nothing.
Corporate media is such trash. She's going to win the corporate media pretend award.
Talking point of war of the year goes too.
Now, next up, let's look at some sociopaths on television. No, not Zuckerberg. I know we got a lot of them lined up here. No, it's this guy. Gidley. What's his first name?
Oh, Hogan. I know this guy.
Oh, watch Hogan. Your buddy Hogan here.
Sadly, I know now.
His stripe on stripe that he's offering us today. Here's Hogan. This is an unbelievable story. There was a U.S. Diplomat. I don't know if she was a diplomat or she's the wife of a U.S. diplomat who was in Britain.
God, this is so crazy.
Yeah, it's horrible. It's a horrible story. She was driving on the wrong side of the road there. In England, they drive on the left side. In America,
could have woken up, been tired, not thinking.
Who knows? Who knows what situation she was under? But let's just presume that it was just a mistake.
Right.
And that there was no other influence on her.
Right.
I don't know that we know because apparently, she got out of there lickety split. Mm-hmm. She hit a teenager, British teenager, killed them, and then got out of the country. As a diplomat, there's really no jurisdiction over you, and they got out of the country back in the States. I don't know that there's I don't know that they can extradite them, but I think that they want her to come back and face some type of suit or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. Not sure.
Isn't there immunity though?
I think there is immunity, but I think they want it. I don't think they're going to get it.
Okay.
So the parents came to the White House. The British parents came to the White House to plead their case to Donald Trump. And apparently the White House thought maybe what we just need to do is get these guys together in a room. And this is Hogan Gidley being questioned about this on Fox News. They're even having problems with this.
Hogan, were you in the room when the parents of Harry Dunn, this 19-year-old British man who was killed by the wife of a U.S. diplomat overseas? She was driving on the wrong side of the road. She fled. She was at the White House along with the victim's parents. And then the parents said that the president's team tried to arrange a meeting with the parents and the woman who killed their son. Those parents appeared this morning on another network and they described that moment as an ambush. Were you there? What happened? How do you explain that?
Well, I've spoken with the president directly about this, and it's just a horrific situation. He offered his condolences to the family. He understands the gravity of this moment and the gravity of this situation. He did this simply on the behest of Boris Johnson, in fact, to meet with that family. He wasn't trying to ambush
Pause it
any-
for 1 second. That's the sound of a bus driving over Boris Johnson. First, they're going to try and blame it on Boris Johnson. Right. Go back, and then we'll go forward again.
President's team tried to arrange a meeting with the parents and the woman who killed their son. Those parents appeared this morning on another network, and they described that moment as an ambush. Were you there? What happened? How do you explain that?
Well, I've spoken with the president directly about this, and it's just a horrific situation. He offered his condolences to the family. He understands the gravity of this moment and the gravity of this situation. He did this simply on the behest of Boris Johnson, in fact, to meet with that family. He wasn't trying to ambush anybody. The fact is, he wanted to offer his condolences. He understood exactly what was going on, and of course, the diplomatic relationship we share with the UK as well. And he was simply trying to offer his condolences to a grieving family facing a horrific situation.
Did he apply pressure on that family to meet with that woman?
Absolutely not. He was wonderful in that setting, explained to them exactly how heartfelt and how sad he was about the situation. That's all that was to offer his condolences and share in their grieving.
They described it as an ambush. Why would they?
They described the scene as terrifying, and they described the president's aides as henchmen.
Again, that's their description. I didn't get any of that when I talked to the president about the situation. In fact, he was the one.
That's what he said. He said, I asked the president, were you surrounded by thugs? Were they acting like henchmen? Were you trying to ambush them? And he said, absolutely not. I was heartfelt. I was so heartfelt.
So sad about this.
Yeah, I'm sure he was real tactful.
Go ahead.
They described the scene as terrifying, and they described the president's aides as henchmen.
Again, that's their description. I didn't get any of that when I talked to the president about the situation. In fact, he was the one calming everybody down and saying, listen, I'm just here to offer my condolences to you who have suffered such a horrific loss. That's what this president does in these situations. It's sad that people come out and they're entitled to their own opinion about the matter, but the president didn't pressure anybody. He doesn't do that in those situations. He's a father. He's a grandfather. He understands this type of sadness. He talks to people every day across this country who have lost.
No, he doesn't.
Hogan.
He treats
How does that guy do that?
Well, he's an operative. He worked for Huckabee. He also was anti-Trump at one point. I mean, this is how all of them are. They're operatives. They go in there, they do their job. They're going to have another job afterwards, and that's it. They have no hearts.
But do they have how hot do their showers run? Like how much scrubbing, do they need a loofah sponge made out of steel to just scrub their bodies like this at
night? I think the
night?
spray tan basically cleans off all of the filth when they get that on.
I just find that unbelievable.
And you meet them. You've done this. You've been on these shows before. You meet a lot of these conservatives, and they're actually quite lovely. More lovely than some of the neoliberal Democrats that you meet in real life. And you just see it's an act. So much of this is an act. Now, just to be fair to those two hosts, they were on the news side of Fox News, which people still don't understand. There was with Shepard Smith at the head, there was a little bit more truth on that side. So they're willing to push back.
What's going on over there? Do you have any inside scoop?
I was there the day that Shep Smith stepped down, and this has all been reported out. People were shocked. Neil Cavuto was on air.
Yeah, I saw Neil Cavuto on air.
My friend
he looked like
is
he was
gone. I'm all alone.
He was shocked.
And Neil's a nice guy too. I mean, again, they're nice people. They get along with, not in policy. We make that very clear. I think Shep was just had it.
Can we revisit what Trump did? Because it's so horrible that it's kind of funny, right? Like just now, ambushing these parents, because again, he thinks about everything like a reality show. Yeah. So in his reality show brain, he's on an episode of Jerry Springer, and he's like, oh, hey guys, what if I told you that you could talk to the woman who killed your son right now?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he My sense isn't that, like, I don't think he came up with the idea. I don't even think he thinks about people that much.
Who are
This
you
sounds
again?
like exactly the kind of idea he would come up with. Like, let's bring her out, folks.
I think it was just there was some plan that, like, oh, we could, let's get her there, see if she can talk sense to him, show that she's sad.
It's your problem, you fix it.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, they did decide to come to the White House. I mean, it wasn't. I mean, they came to make the case, so it wasn't like the meeting was set up by him. I'm not.
No.
This is the parents.
Diplomat being there, though,
No, I
was
understand that.
coming from the White House,
which is Cuckoo Town.
Right.
The other side of this it's a big story in the UK and understand what's happening with Brexit. Now Boris Johnson has to move the parliament, move his party's vote in favor of Brexit to get it to go through after the EU approved it. So that was a weird kind of, any sort of normal politician, global leader would not blame Boris Johnson, especially if Donald Trump wants Brexit to happen.
Ostensibly being, yes. And you get the sense, now I imagine your buddy Gidley wouldn't have thrown Johnson under the bus from a professional standpoint unless the president said, like, make sure you tell him it was Boris Johnson's idea. It wasn't my idea. It didn't even occur to me.
Well,
I don't even see what the big deal is.
It's a Trump first White House. It's the way everyone's like, what? How does he thinks Trump first, immediate, and that's it.
Right. What's this clip here?
He's talking about the meeting.
Oh, this is where Trump himself talks about him. It was a perfect meeting. It was a great meeting. I haven't seen this clip. I bet you it's going to be just as horrible as you imagine.
It's going to work. They've treated the Republican Party with great disrespect. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. My meeting with the family was really, it was beautiful in a certain way. They did not want to meet with the person in question, but we had a very good meeting. They're very nice people. And we met with a full group. It was 4 people, actually, as you know how it's all broken up. And the meeting took place right here at about 6 o'clock last night. And
exactly.
It was very sad, to be honest. She lost, and they lost their son. I believe it was going down the wrong way because that happens in Europe. You go to Europe and the roads are opposite.
Oh my God.
And it's very tough. If you're from the United States, you do make that
hard for the United States.
That decision to make a right turn where you're supposed to make a left turn. The roads are opposite. And she said that's what happened. That happens to a lot of people, by the way. But she said that's what happened. She was in the room right out there. We met right here in this area. And I offered to bring the person in question in. And they weren't ready for it. But I did offer. I spoke
They also
with,
didn't know about it.
Boris, he asked me if I do that, and I did it.
Boris.
Unfortunately, they wanted to meet with her, and unfortunately, when we had everybody together, they decided not to meet. Perhaps they had lawyers involved by that time. I don't know exactly. I know the people were lovely. They were very nice, and they were, desperately sad.
Desperately sad.
The live studio audience was very disappointed.
I would be curious to find out the parents' reaction to this idea that they somehow said it was okay and then they revoked it. Because it doesn't sound like they had any idea that this person in question, who could happen to anybody, happens really hard on Americans.
Opposite roads, very bad. It happens.
What are the roundabouts about anyway?
Your kid, he had a good run of it though.
This makes, remember Elian Gonzalez and how the country just, it was such a big story. This is like this a thing can happen and it turns into a large story where the country is just paying attention to that story for like a month or two. This would be that kind of story in a normal news environment, in normal administration.
Yeah, but of course, in a normal administration, they would never do that. I mean, the thing is that if this happened, if somehow there was if Trump was a Democrat,
right,
this story would be all over the place. It would be huge, because the right is much better at exploiting this type of thing. It doesn't occur to anybody in the Democratic Party that like, oh, we should exploit this in some fashion, largely because there's no policy. She's just like a horrible human being. But it's hard to imagine that if the story got more play. But again, I think that Donald Trump is I think that the relationship with the Republicans and Donald Trump is pretty well forged. I don't think that much is going to shake it loose, and I think it's all negative partisanship these days. And so I think Democrats might respond to something like this, but
it's not worth the time. But
right.
there's just so many other stories. But it's crazy that this is the kind of story in the 90s that would have taken over the country. I mean,
during Obama, we had 2 weeks of he wore a tan suit.
Oh, right. Oh my God.
Right? I mean,
still my favorite suit.
I just wish they'd let him keep talking a little bit longer, because he was so close to saying that all the roads in the world just need to be the same as we do it in America.
We should have. This is a great ad. There's a lot happening with DAs. We almost had a big win up in Queens with Caban. And I think, is she contesting? Wasn't there like another level of investigation that was happening with some of the ballots recently? But I don't know what the deal was. There was some suit to count ballots that were uncounted. Nevertheless, with Krasner in Philadelphia, there is a sort of a wave of there's a reform movement amongst DAs, or at least people who are seeking the position of district attorney. This is Chiesa Boudin, Boudin, who is let's play the ad. I mean, some people may know who he is already.
We live in a city built on a
Oopsies.
simple ideal. It's called equal justice for all. But for so many of us, this ideal is being betrayed. We've become a city of prosperity, but also of abject poverty. We've become a city of aspiration, but also of exclusion and inequity. Our most vulnerable residents do not receive the mental health care and shelter they need. We fill our jails with African-American San Franciscans who make up more than half the county's inmates, but only 5% of the city's population. We let the wealthy defendants go free on bail, even if they're dangerous, while the poor remain behind bars, even if they're innocent. I know what it's like to be impacted by the criminal justice system. When I was an infant, my mother was sentenced to decades in prison. My father may never get out. My earliest memories are walking through steel gates to visit them. When I served as a public defender, I brought those experiences with me to the courthouse every day as I worked on behalf of the poorest and most overlooked residents of our city to ensure that people who couldn't afford a lawyer still had access to equal justice. I'm part of a growing movement that's bringing a new vision to the district attorney's office, a vision to make the criminal justice system work for all of us, not just the rich and powerful. Justice demands an independent voice, someone willing to directly challenge a broken system. That means someone willing to confront those with power, not someone beholden to a political machine, not someone who owes favors to the people who protect the status quo. San Francisco is one of the greatest cities on earth, but it isn't money or power or venture capital that makes us great. It's our vision of a society that values everyone. We can end money bail, test every single rape kit, stand up to ICE and the Trump administration, and eliminate racial disparities. We can make San Francisco a city of equality and inclusion. We have that choice before us right now in this election. Let's make San Francisco work for all of us. Please vote Chiesa Boudin for district attorney.
So his folks, Kathy Boudin and David Gilbert, who were members of the Weather Underground and were I think it was a Brinks robbery and sent to prison for I can't remember how long Kathy Boudin was in there, but maybe 20 years or something, or 18 years. And then raised by Bill Ayers.
It's unreal.
And Bernadine Dorn. And
now he's running to be a cop.
And now he's running to be a cop.
poetic.
Right?
Yeah. And shout out to Leighton Woodhouse and his partner. I don't know Leighton's partner, but they emailed out they worked on this.
It's an impressive ad, I think. It's going to be interesting. It's interesting to see reform hit that position in a way that, like, in a way that is, it expands the imagination of what that position can be in a really important way, I think.
Especially in a state like California with the private prison complex. It's just owned the state's criminal justice system and politicians for decades. I mean, we see it with Kamala Harris right now. I think it's a great narrative, a counter narrative. And, her approval ratings in her own state, forget about the presidential primary, are going down. So it's amazing to see just the shift so drastic and so rapidly in California, even in Northern California, where you think it's this like beacon of progress.
Right.
There have been a lot of conversations within DSA specifically about how to approach these quote unquote progressive prosecutors that are running right now. There was a resolution that I think did not make it to the floor at this year's convention. And I can honestly see it from both sides. I think if you're more of a progressive, liberal, reformist type, it's a no-brainer. These are reformist reforms. It's harm reduction. It makes sense. If you're coming at it from a perspective of abolition, as the organizers from No New Jails are, the people that I spent all day with yesterday at the No New Jails rally, that's not enough. It doesn't fit into an abolitionist horizon. As they say, there's no such thing as a progressive prosecutor. And No New Jails is a non-reformist reform in that you are not just making things better for people in jail, you're reducing the number of people who can even be put in jail in a way that hopefully has a snowball effect. And the relationship between these two approaches and between these two tactics is, it's got a fraught history. It's really complicated. But my hope is that an organization like DSA can kind of walk the line between them, because we have so many different kinds of politics and we have so many different kinds of organizers. And, in all the internal contradictions that come with it. But
you can do both, though. You can apply the political pressure. I mean, a DA doesn't have the ability to really decide on whether or not no new jails are set up after you close Rikers. It's really a political decision. It's a city council decision. It's a mayoral decision. So having, you have to, if you're going to go the political route, understand where to apply that pressure effectively and where to apply the pressure within the terms of, the DA is going to exist. It's not going to be shut down. So would you rather have
that's the thing,
an asshole in there or?
Well, I think there are, at one point the DSA has to, figure out what positions are we going to endorse?
Right.
What positions as a matter of policy we will not endorse anybody because we don't think the position should exist.
Right. Well, it's delicate, right? Because there are people in the No New Jails movement who don't trust DSA, partly because it's of, our race and class makeup that we have right now, but partly because we do things like endorse DAs, and we do things coming from a more reformist, less abolitionist perspective that uphold, at the end of the day, the carceral state and the bourgeois state. So, I want them to trust us. I understand why they might not. I also got to give a shout out to folks like Tiffany Caban, who did endorse No New Jails and took up the cause of abolition, despite knowing that the people who are most heavily involved with this are never going to give them their support or their endorsement in return.
Let's check in with the folks over at the Five.
I forgot.
Everybody on that show, what do you think that they make on that show? They got to be very wealthy. I don't know if each one of the Five make $1 million a year, but someone like Jesse Waters is on there.
Does.
And he does. He's got his own show. He's got to be. Greg Gutfield, I bet, makes, I don't know if he makes $1 million, but he's got to get pretty close. The others, I think, are probably deep into the six figures. They've all been there for quite a while.
Except for the Democrat.
Yeah, exactly. And now I don't know who is this. She's
Martha McCallum.
Oh, Martha McCallum. Okay. Yeah, here we go. They're complaining about the idea that it's now convenient for you to figure out how much you should leave for a tip. And these are the free marketers, right? Like, they have no problem with an opioid manufacturer, pushing opioids on, hundreds of pills per person in any given county. They have no problem with the president promoting his own products. But if you're a waiter,
Yeah.
if you work at or you work at like a coffee shop and you try and ask for a tip, that's obnoxious.
In terms of the thing that really tips me off is the iPad thing that they hold up in your face after they give you coffee and say, like, do you want to tip me 10, 15 or 20%? And just like
right
putting,
in front of them.
I hate that.
Yeah.
I think
I'm
that's
not afraid
rude.
to go zero right in their face.
Are you kidding me?
Well, I mean, all you're doing is handing me coffee. Then
I
you
know.
get a tip for that.
That's like, and you're supposed to sign a thing, oh, how much do you want to tip me? And they're looking over your shoulder. I think that's obnoxious.
It's too aggressive.
Actually, I think that's obnoxious. But I think most people, in terms of the thing.
Yeah.
Someone spit in her coffee.
Exactly. I hope.
I would hope they're going to
you're-
do it now.
I mean, it's unbelievable. It's just shocking to me.
Yeah, my coffee every morning. I'm granted it's a little bit of a coffee snob. Is $5. Okay. If I'm paying $5 for a coffee, I'm going to give you a $1 tip.
The idea though that you would brag about having I'm not afraid to leave them nothing. Wow, that takes a lot of guts, man.
But you're spending so much on these products. This is what blows my mind. It's blatant disrespect for employees.
It's crazy.
Of any sort.
I mean,
worker.
it's true that tipping is a bad model of compensation where people have to just like.
I get the sense that's not what they're talking about.
Obviously. People just have to kiss the ass of the people they're serving and dance like monkeys in order to get a living wage. But that is the system that we have. And as long as we have that, you are an asshole if you know someone's making $5 an hour and it's on you to pay them for the service that they performed you and you don't do it.
Well, Waters is an asshole, and they know they get it off both sides of this, because when DC was trying to do the tipping stuff, I'm sure Fox and Friends or someone was about how socialist that was, basically.
Well, and the other aspect of this is they actually have, a good chunk of the viewers are working people. So what I actually enjoyed about the old school Fox News, I can't believe I'm saying this, is you did have a little bit of a populist that would never come out of Bill O'Reilly's mouth, ever. Because he had this worker appreciation and he would never disrespect the viewer. And that's why his ratings, I think, essentially were so good, is that he wouldn't give into that aspect. And that dance doesn't happen at Fox News.
I just try to stick to targeting women and minorities. I don't.
The business model
I don't
of Fox
pick on the
News.
poors.
Well, there's probably a
Whites,
way to flip
anyways.
this in their twisted logic and make the baristas these cultural elites, right? Because they live in cities, they've got tattoos,
These
they probably
Brooklyn-y,
have degrees
baristas.
in book stuff that's bad, and
But funny, but they do have an iPad that they're shoving in, but like they're carrying around an iPad.
Can't the iPad make the coffee?
MFer, I want more iced tea.
I do think it signals the fall of Fox News, though. I know that sounds strange, but they would never insult their base.
Here's Mark Zuckerberg trying to make an argument that technology is empowering. And this is to some extent what he's saying is true, but you also need to realize that he's saying this in service of maintaining an oligarchy, right? It is like, we're going to give you, here's the deal. We're going to bake this big cake and you're going to get some crumbs from it. And that's more than you had before. Mm-hmm. Because it is true that it democratizes things like Twitter and Facebook and whatnot. That democratizes sort of the discourse a little bit. I mean, you have platforms that get created. But at the end of the day, the power, what it also is doing, it is allowing the concentration of power so that discourse becomes less relevant in super important questions.
In the world. It is a fifth estate alongside the other power structures in our society. And people no longer have to rely on traditional gatekeepers in politics or media to make their voices heard, and that has important consequences. And I understand the concerns that people have about how tech platforms have centralized power. But I actually believe that the much bigger story is how much these platforms have decentralized power by putting it directly into people's hands. It's part of this amazing expansion of voice that we've experienced through law and culture and now technology as well.
All right. You know, what's interesting is that, yes, it has enhanced people's voices, but he doesn't really make it clear on how they've enhanced people's power. Because he says on one hand, the bigger story is not these massive concentrations of power because I'm sitting atop a billions worth of dollars and an asset that can change all of this, and I can actually switch a lot of stuff by just futzing with the algorithms. The bigger story is that people now can have their own personal brands and can talk and be heard. And that may be a bigger story for the individual on some level, right? Like for me, yes, like I am on YouTube and...
But that was a conversation in like 2008. That's not what it is today.
Exactly.
There's no, that's like the Chamber of Commerce selling small businesses. Meanwhile, these small businesses are being eaten up by monopolies. That's not the conversation people are having today. And let's not forget, those voices, what he packages as free speech was actually free content for him. And that's how he was able to build his power and monopolize this industry. If I wanted to start a Facebook tomorrow, that wouldn't happen. If I wanted to start anything tomorrow on a technological platform, it would either be eaten up right away or there's just no way to raise the capital to be able to compete with it. There's just, sorry, tech entrepreneurs, I hate to break it to you, you missed your opportunity. Like that's where we are today.
The headline for him is that he figured out how to make money off of the things people do in the course of their day-to-day lives.
That's right.
In a way, it's a form of primitive accumulation, right? It's like the gold rush. He's broken new ground. There was a sector of life that capital had not yet found a way to intrude upon and extract value from, and he figured it out. So when you might be normally sitting around talking to your friends, dicking around on the internet, whatever, these are social reproductive activities you do for free, he's figured out how to monetize it and make us all his workers, basically.
That's right.
The key adjective he used is traditional gatekeepers, because he can't just say the word gatekeepers. And he's got to worry about the time where people stop looking at Facebook as this new tech thing and people realize that, oh, that's just another gatekeeper in itself.
That's right.
Will you just pull up some audio of Donald Trump Jr.? Because these guys sound almost identical. It just, Zuckerberg sounds like Donald Trump Jr. would if he was on ecstasy, where I just sort of feel like he's got a little bit more sort of like breath and a little bit more feigned excitement. Like, I'm going to try and make you excited about this new frontier that, here we go. Play Zuckerberg and then play Trump.
He looks like a Star Trek
in the world.
Yeah.
It is a fifth estate alongside the other power structures in our society.
Okay, now do it.
When you're the father and your son's entire career is dependent on that,
right?
They own you, Sean. That's what it is.
He's just a little bit more angry.
And
he's not trying to sell. He's trying to indict people. Yeah. There you go. All right, we got time for just a couple of phone calls, and then we got to get out of here, folks. A lot of people have been hanging on the phone, calling from a 732 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? 732.
Hi, this is Nate from New Jersey.
Nate from New Jersey, what's on your mind?
I was just wondering, why hasn't someone invoked the UN Charter with Turkey just invading Syria? I mean, that's how the Korean War started. North Korea invaded South Korea. We invoked the UN Charter. Everybody went in and stopped them. Now nothing is happening.
Trump doing that?
That is, I think that's a good argument. I don't know why we're not hearing that, really, frankly. I think my understanding is, last week there was before the vote where the Security Council was going to condemn it, there was some argument about it, but apparently Turkey says that Article 51 of the UN Charter that they have a right to self-defense against armed attack allows them. I don't know. I don't know how they can justify that, but they're saying that the YPG gives material support to the PKK, I guess, is basically their argument.
Did you guys see that Obama's UN ambassador endorsed, Samantha Power came out and said that Trump has basically endorsed ethnic cleansing and called for the UN ambassador to denounce that? This is uncharted territory.
Crazy.
This is crazy.
Appreciate the call, Nate. We're going to try and do a couple of these quick, folks, because calling from a 773 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
This is Uchi Wally, man.
Uchi Wally, what's happening? What's on your mind?
Andrew Yang. Basically, he's bitten into this thing that economics of America are going to be screwed up because of automation. He works that into like every answer he gives and every question in every debate. And the unfortunate thing is he's got all these economists supporting what he's saying, but economics is a cult, not a science. So the problem is that I pointed about this before on a previous call, but when you measure automation, which is easily measurable, you're measuring productivity growth, right? If you've got 10 guys making widgets and you automate it so one guy can do that work, then you had 1,000% increase in automation, right?
Yep.
You look at the automation for the last decade, it's been about 1.3%.
If you look at productivity, if you look at productivity.
Yeah, same thing. Right. Same thing, right? In manufacturing. If you look at that, it's about 1.3%, which is lower than it was during the 50s. So the problem that we have is that we're preparing for this apocalypse of robots taking our jobs that's just not going to come. And he's wasting all of our time with that and the stupidity of his UBI.
I agree about the automation. You would see if automation was in fact responsible for the job loss that we've seen, it wouldn't have come back around cyclically we have seen since the recession. The jobs aren't as good. People are working more hours, but the fact of the matter is that people are getting employed. They may not like the jobs. They may not be the same quality of jobs, but that's not a function of robots aren't doing the better jobs in that situation. And you're right. The lack of productivity growth, the flat line of productivity, wouldn't happen if the story was that robots were taking over. And it's. That story just still remains, and I think it's just an excuse in which, for people not to do anything.
Well, if you talk to a Marxist economist, they will agree with you on most of this, because if you believe Marx, surplus value, can only be extracted. What we think of as profits, basically, it's not exactly the same thing, can only be extracted from human labor. So there you go, right there. If you replace everyone with robots, the economy will crash, and Marxists have predicted that.
If you believe in a consumer-based economy, which is, I think, ultimately the issue that Fox News and these...
Well, as someone who works in IT, I have a strong problem with the idea that robots are going to end up taking anybody's job. It's all hype, right? They've got us telling us that, cars are going to drive themselves. But if I go to a car dealership, where do I go to buy one of these cars?
Right.
Well,
they don't exist.
I mean, if you're sitting in a city like New York right now, where Uber and Lyft are, putting together their plans, right? I mean, it's actually in the works when it comes to Uber transitioning within 2 years to a completely driverless.
Good luck.
Good luck, because we have unions. I mean, that's
not
what I'm
even
saying.
unions.
There's
I
going
don't
to
think
be
the technology is there. Frankly.
I agree.
But here's the other thing. All I do is I go back to that article I found in a steamer trunk 25 years ago at a yard sale. That was from 1950. 1950, a futurist was talking to the Rotary Club in Miami, explaining that the biggest challenge we were going to have by the time we get to the 1990s is how to deal with the leisure time that we have, because we will be at a 4-day work week because robots will have been taking over and automation will be taking over so much of the work that there won't be enough work for us to do. Right. There was a
president, I think it was Nixon, that actually said that. I think it was Nixon.
Well, I think we're going to hear it perpetually. The guy also said, to his credit, he predicted that we'd be walking around with watches where we can watch TV on the watches that would get information from satellites, and they would be powered by kerosene.
By kerosene,
So, yeah,
that's
he
interesting.
didn't quite get all of it, but he was close. Uchiwali, I appreciate
There's
the phone
a thread
call.
on Twitter if you're interested in more of this Marxist digression. Joshua Clover, friend of my show, anyway, he hasn't been on this show, but he's really rad. He talks about the difference between absolute surplus value, the amount that people work, basically the amount of hours, versus relative surplus value, which is surplus value that's extracted with technology and efficiency measures, and makes a really convincing case for the fact that we cannot have an economy that's run purely on relative surplus value. There still has to be a base of absolute surplus value for it to be laid on top of. So check it out.
So how does this apply to journalism?
Calling from a 515 area code. I can't wait for this my whole job to be taken over by the robots. As long as I guess I just got to just. I would assume that we have a way to go back, cull over the library that we have, pull all my words, right, and just have someone edit together the show in some fashion. How many different poses would I need to do for the deep fake to take place here?
Well, that's
right?
what Mark Zuckerberg is. He's basically the manufactured version of his essence.
Yeah, he could be a robot right now. Call him from a 515 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hello, Sam. This is Hannah Laura from Southeast Iowa calling back.
Hello,
How are you guys doing?
Wait, Laura? What was the first part?
It's Hannah Laura.
Hannah Laura.
Like Honolulu.
Okay, Hannah Laura. Welcome. What's on your mind?
Okay, so I've missed a couple days. Have you guys talked about or heard about Carson King and the Des Moines Register whole blow up?
No.
It might seem kind of niche, but so there was this kid, Carson King. He's not a kid. He's like 24 or something like that. He held up this sign at the University of Iowa game day. Like it was on ESPN, and it said Busch Light supply needs replenished, and then he gave his Venmo. And so like money started pouring in, and after
Busch Light, as in the
$500,
beer,
he said,
as in the beer, Busch beer. Okay.
yes,
that's amazing.
yeah. So just to call, just a gag or whatever. So he starts getting hundreds of dollars. After $500, he says, okay, I'm going to donate this to the Children's Hospital at the University of Iowa. And it's really cool, and Anheuser-Busch says they're going to do some kind of sponsorship with him. They're going to donate $1 million to this children's hospital in Iowa City, right?
We have solved the
good,
healthcare
happy
crisis.
Story. What's that?
We've solved the healthcare crisis. That's all we need to do.
Right, I know. Beer panhandlers. So the trouble comes. It's this great feel-good story. And a Des Moines Register reporter, Aaron Calvin is his name. He doesn't work there anymore. Excuse me. He is going to interview him and do a story, and he's doing his work, and he finds some old tweets from when this guy Carson King was.
I think I did hear this.
That were racist. Yeah. So then there's this huge backlash against the Des Moines Register, which personally I don't care. They're right wing, owned by Gannett, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't care about them in particular, but I just find this whole situation really sort of confounding. And then there's like another component. So if let me catch up if you haven't heard. So this guy at the Register got just all this backlash. They found old misogynist and really bad tweets. He's N-word and that sort of thing.
This.
So yeah. So then the recent development happened a few days ago. So only if you're like a biking geek, maybe if you would have heard of this outside of Iowa, but we have this thing called Ragbri, where it's a whole week where people bike across Iowa, like 10 to 15,000 people, I think. It's been going on almost 50 years, and it's Ragbri stands for Register's Annual Great Bike Ride Across Iowa. So it was just started like through the Des Moines Register in the 70s, I think.
Okay.
And So now the management, the people who've been running RAGBRAI, just quit, and they scheduled, there's like, I guess like 16 people on this team. They scheduled their own bike ride the same week as RAGBRAI, and they're calling it Iowa's Ride. And it's
so
just
okay.
this whole story kind of like,
All right. So we'll give me,
it just comes from this. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I mean, it's an interesting story, but what do you perceive as the point?
Well, I guess Michael's not here to talk about cancel culture, but there's an element of that where, the Des Moines Register, this reporter was getting, death threats and that sort of thing for, pulling up and, ruining this feel-good story. And then at the same time, it's like is 16 old enough to be, know the difference between racist jokes that you know?
Well, I guess my feeling about this is a little bit different. I don't know if that's really either one of those is the question from my perspective. It's that what bearing to the extent that this, and I don't know, maybe if this kid was going to try and sign like some type of, deal where he becomes a spokesperson for something or was trying to professionalize this, then maybe that stuff becomes a little bit more relevant.
Right.
But I don't see what the relevance of this guy's past tweets are, at least to the extent that what you've told me about the story. And I haven't read, I recognize the story, but I haven't read it, that beyond what you've told us. My feeling is just like, it has, I don't even know what cancel culture means. Really? I mean, I know what it's supposed to mean, but I don't know that, I'm not terribly worried about it. I think people who are public figures can be judged in what they put out publicly. I mean, that's like, Twitter is a public, means of communication. Mm-hmm. If you're a public figure, you tweet out stuff, you got to be able to answer for it. Now, I've been in this situation and, you've got to answer for it in some fashion. But I don't see why, this kid who was like not making a big affirmative move to become a public figure.
Right.
He didn't have a responsibility to the public.
Yeah, I don't think he had a responsibility to the public. And so I think it's unfair for a paper to dig into him like that. And it looks like, I think a reporter who's doing that is being a little bit creepy, frankly, and missing the point. I understand they're going to get clicks, but I do think that is, I'm not saying that I'm not being an apologist for what the kid's, racist stuff is, but I think that's something that people on his Twitter feed should deal with in that context.
I think wasn't it also part of the public record originally, and that was the reporters citing it? So it's kind of like it was already on the public record. So if you glossed over it, then are you making a problem by not talking about what this guy because I don't think that broke. I haven't followed this super closely, but my understanding was that the reporter justified it by saying this was already publicly known information, and I just noted it in the story.
Well, meaning Twitter is a form of public record.
But it's not. No, it's not relevant.
He doesn't need to be. Here's the point. He wasn't running for office. He wasn't, auditioning for some sort of position where he had a maximum. He was pretending to be woke. He was a guy who raised money off beer money. And he didn't have any responsibility. He wasn't being vetted for anything. Yeah. And even then, the cancel culture has gotten to the point, in my opinion, where there are people who evolve. I can't think of any other situation than Cenk. When Cenk was one of the founders of Justice Democrats, and I've never commented on this, and he was kicked out because of things that he wrote 25 years prior when he was a Republican. And his response was, yes, I have been open about the things that I used to do that were horrible and how I evolved into becoming a progressive. And they still canceled him. Well, but from Justice Democrats.
Well, but I mean,
people evolve.
I think it is the prerogative of an institution or an organization to say, we're going to distance ourselves from someone because it has public relations problems. I think that's fine. Cenk's not canceled.
No,
Cenk's still,
but,
I mean, that's
he founded Justice Democrats.
Well, I understand, but he got kicked out of the organization, or they wanted to step away from him, or whatever it is. But I think that I don't have a problem with that. If an organization wants to sort of like create some like I don't have a problem with the idea. The argument should be made in terms of the Justice Democrats and Cenk based on its merits. If people felt that way strongly, that what he said, was not that bad and that it doesn't reflect poorly on them, fine. But it's like, it's not up to an institution to give atonement. It's, like an institution has their own primary directive, and it's their job to protect what they're doing, what the central mission is. And it is, it's up to, like, if Cenk could have made a huge issue out of, like, they've jettisoned me. And I don't think he did that.
No, he didn't.
Because he understood that the directive of the organization was more important. Like, I think on some level, like, Al Franken had second thoughts. But the fact is that he had to step down because he didn't want it to inhibit the Doug Jones's chances against Roy Moore. Now, that was his decision to make. And I think that's a different, because neither one of them are canceled. They're both living their lives. They're both, to the extent that Franken's not a senator anymore, which is total, he made that decision. He could have hung in there, but he knew there was another price to be paid, which he made the decision as to whether he wasn't. He wasn't ousted.
Right.
He was
as far
pushed.
as we know.
Well, no, he wasn't ousted. He was pushed. But he wasn't. He made that last jump. I think, like, I think we're all in agreement in terms of, like, this kid who was not professionalizing, was not, making an affirmative attempt to sort of like make as far as I know, based on the limited facts that we know, I don't think that is appropriate, in that situation. But I don't think that it's, like, I just have a problem with the term cancel culture because. I think, Harvey Weinstein should go to jail.
Well,
right. But, and
that's
then
a different kind of canceling.
That's different.
Well, and I think there should be
criminal.
I don't want, I would have a problem with, I would have a problem sort of assessing, a news outfit that allowed, someone like, what's his face?
Matt Lauer.
Or was it Halperin?
Halperin,
like,
Andy Lack.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think it's an issue. And so,
and silenced reporting and pushed away reporting.
Yeah, I think that is.
But that's a
shocked
current state. I mean, I think the issue a lot of folks are having with cancel culture is number one, do you even deserve cancellation? Do you deserve the critique? Do you deserve the vetting? And I say deserve from a context of, is this something that are you rising to the occasion to perform some sort of extraordinary duty that affects the public's perception or influences the public in any way? Okay, that deserves vetting. But I think what a lot of folks are having issues with cancel culture is past actions that have been overcome, learned from, and changed. Now, NBC is currently sitting under a crisis, and they've covered it up. And then they criticize Fox News, which is equally, they're all the same. They all have these internal cultures. Some are a little bit more open about it, and some it's behind the scenes.
Yeah, and I think, but then also the question is like, how do you establish that someone has surpassed these things? I mean, and then the question is like, does an institution have the ability to make that assessment, to look inside someone and know if they've genuinely changed? I mean,
people got to be smart about it. It's a case by case basis.
Right.
Exactly.
Well, yes, I agree. And I'm told here, I just saw this, that apparently it is standard practice to run background checks, according to the journalist, right? It was in BuzzFeed, but that's
background checks of what?
Well, but that's the point. Is like, it's one thing to run a background check and find out like, oh, this guy has a history of raising money and diverting it from what he's saying he's giving it to, because that has direct bearing on this. Or this guy has run this scam before.
Right.
But to make it about something that's completely different, even as it's bad, I just don't think it should be a part of that story unless the guy is going out and trying to trade off it in some way to expand, and ask for the public's trust.
Right.
Then it becomes relevant. But
or if they're being a hypocrite in some way. Yeah, like the lady who was dissing Bernie for not talking enough about LGBT issues, and then it came out that she had some horrible racist tweets like 7 years ago.
Right. I mean, fair enough. But I think the idea is if you're asking for the public's trust, then some issues that might infringe upon that. But he made it pretty clear, like he was looking for beer money. And, it wasn't like he was like, so I don't know.
Also, doesn't
But
this journalist
appreciate
have
the
some other
call,
jobs to do?
Hannah Laura.
I mean, if you're going to go through that amount of research, why not do some like following the money of actual politicians? Or, you're on the Iowa beat. Why not follow the Democratic primary and follow their money? Oh, no, let's look at this beer money and this like 16-year-old.
Right. We're going to search on Twitter. Well, listen, folks, we're out of time. We will see you on my Nomi. Thank you so much for joining us. Always a pleasure to have you here. It is very fun to have you here.
Wait, should we plug the Bernie rally tomorrow?
Oh yeah. Are people aware that there's a Bernie rally in Queens that is going to feature AOC?
Hell yeah!
And me.
I know, it's going to be facetious.
I'll be there.
Sadly, I cannot be there,
No.
but I know it.
I saw you at the last one. It was so great.
I know. I wanted to go, but I've got both the kids. If I had just had the older one, I think I would make her come. But 6-year-old, he gets a little nervous in those crowds. So
I'll enjoy it extra for you.
I appreciate that. All right, folks. See you Monday.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bulb, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I guess somewhere the choice was made for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive